FBI Agent's Reluctant Lover, The Denver Men Series, Book 3, by Leslie North. Chapter 1, 3 days ago. While Chance Jacobson was good at his job, even he could hit a wall at times. Sometimes things just didn't work out. But he wasn't going to let that happen today. Thanks to Maria's sleuthing and some old-fashioned detective work at his end, Chance Jacobson had managed to figure out the name of the nurse that Marco Bresci had hired after he'd kidnapped baby Faith. Having contacted all the short-term placement agencies in the area and gotten hung up on almost every time with admonishments about violating HIPAA, he was on the verge of calling in a favor at the bureau when he hit pay dirt. At least he hoped so. When he'd gone to the apartment of one Chelsea Andrews, he'd found out through a bit of flirting with the very helpful temporary tenant that she was subletting the apartment for the next 6 months, while Chelsea was on a placement assignment that would include international travel. All of that seemed very, very promising. Unfortunately, the woman didn't have any specifics to share, aside from an offer of breakfast tomorrow morning. He'd briefly debated giving the woman his phone number in case she heard from Chelsea, but instead had handed her one of his brother's business cards requesting that she call there if she remembered or discovered any more info to share. With a baby missing, now was not the time for a hookup. And admittedly, she wasn't his type. Too aggressive and strangely lacking in compassion, which struck him as odd coming from a nurse. It was late when he returned to the offices of Marshall Jacobson Investigations, also known as MJI, and he was surprised to see their office manager, Maria, still there along with her husband, Tristram. "Dude," Tris called out, "you are just in time. Baby mama here had a craving for Thai, and I brought extra. Help yourself." "Thanks, Tris." "Just don't touch my shrimp," Maria shouted from the other room. "Yes, ma'am." Grabbing some pineapple fried rice, Chance headed into an empty office and booted up his laptop. He began a social media search of Chelsea Andrews and found a few hits, but they were sporadic. Clicking on her Instagram account, he scrolled through photos for anything that could turn into a lead and bingo! She had a sister in town. Scrolling through photos, he slowed to look at images of the sister with what looked to be very young babies. Twins, from the photo captions, and no sign of the father. Continuing to look through the photos, he finally came across pics of uniformed service members doing a military salute in a cemetery. The sister was there in the background of the picture, clearly pregnant, wearing a black dress and hiding her face in her hands. Ah! Chance rubbed his chest, feeling bad for babies who would never know their father. He sent out a silent wish for peace for the family. But they weren't the only family dealing with loss. And the kidnapping of Trent and Brianna's baby was a hurt that could still be mended if they could find the newborn in time. To do that, he needed to find the sister. As he ate and surfed the web, his phone rang. It was Sean. "Please tell me you've heard from him?" Chance asked his brother's business partner. "Not yet. Seth is still MIA, but that's normal for him. Have you found anything at your end?" "Possibly. I'll let you know. How are Trent and Brianna?" "Not good, man. Brianna is desperate and Trent looks ready to commit murder. We need to find the baby." "I'm going to follow this potential lead. I'll let you know if I find out anything." "Thanks, Chance. Whatever you can do will be appreciated." Putting his phone down, Chance finished shoveling food into his mouth. He wasn't too worried about his brother. Seth could look after himself. But how did this nurse, Chelsea Andrews, play into things, and would her sister Rachel know anything? Switching over to a People Search app, he found the sister's phone number and called. As the phone began to ring, he looked at the time. Almost 8 p.m. Not late by most standards, but the rules might be different in a house with babies. Taking a chance, he dialed the number and was relieved when she answered the phone. "Hello?" He could hear the fatigue in her voice. "Hi. My name is Chance Jacobson, and I'm trying to track down your sister, Chelsea." There was silence at her end, and he wondered if she'd hung up. "Rachel? Are you still there? Sorry to bother you at home so late, but it's urgent that I talk to her as soon as possible." He could hear her sigh before she answered. "Look, I don't know what you're selling, but whatever it is, I'm not interested and neither is my sister." "Please don't hang up. I'm not selling anything. I need your help. Do you know where your sister is?" Chance crossed his fingers that she would answer his question, but then he heard the unmistakable cries of not one, but two babies. "Look, now is not a good time. I've got to go." Before he could reply, the line went dead. He immediately hit redial, but this time she didn't answer, and the call went to voicemail. Staring at his phone, he quietly set it down on the desk. Rubbing his head, he stared at the photos of Rachel on Instagram. In the older photos, prior to the pictures from the funeral, she looked so happy. But after? Her grief was etched on her face. Part of him hated the thought of hounding her for answers when it was clear she was going through a tough time. But surely someone who'd experienced loss herself would want to help Trent and Brianna, right? Resolved, he decided to go see her in person. Hopefully then, she'd be more amenable to answering his questions. Chapter 2. Why was every light on? Chance sat in front of the small stucco house in the middle of the suburbs of Denver. He tried calling Rachel again while he sat outside, but his calls kept going to voicemail. He hoped that by showing up in person, he might be able to convince her of the seriousness of the situation. And then, well, then he'd have to talk her into helping him, which might end up being a tough sell. While he would never regret leaving the FBI, it was times like this that he wished he still had a badge to flash. It was amazing how much more cooperative people were once the government was involved. Chance couldn't help remembering his last case, when the suspects had been particularly uncooperative. He rubbed his right side where he carried a scar from that altercation. The attack should have been expected and would have been if it wasn't for the fact that one of the agents had been playing both sides. Too many lives had been lost that day. Once he was out of the hospital, he'd included his resignation with his final report, walked away, and never looked back. As of an hour ago, Seth was still MIA in the baby hunt, but Chance wasn't worried. His brother could look after himself. But how did this nurse, Chelsea Andrews, play into things, and would her sister Rachel know anything? Only one way to find out. Getting out of his car, he headed up the path. The place looked a little run down. The outside needed a new coat of paint. The roof was worn in spots and would probably give out under next winter's snow. But the yard was tidy, and the last flowers of summer were hanging on in a couple of flower beds on either side of the front door and in 2 hanging baskets. The porch had a swing too, and Chance looked away from it. The place looked like an almost happy home, and Chance could hardly remember what those were like. His stomach knotted, and he put his focus back on his assignment. Knocking on the front door, he waited for Rachel to answer. He was hoping she was in a better frame of mind than she had been earlier, when she'd blown off his call. He didn't have much intel on her. He knew Chelsea Andrews worked as a nurse, specialized in newborns, and had told the nurse she'd sublet her apartment to that she'd be gone for 6 months. He'd also learned that the sister was a recent widow, and some digging had uncovered the information that her husband had been killed in Afghanistan by a roadside bomb while running convoy security. There was a lot of tough luck going around. The door opened and a woman stood there, tears rolling down her face and a screaming baby in her arms. Another kid was on the floor, crawling around by her leg, also crying. From what he could see, the house was in chaos, with the TV blaring something way too cheerful, toys strewn around. And was that baby food stuck to the woman's shirt? Rachel wasn't having a good night either. This was no serene Madonna. Her hair was falling out of a lopsided ponytail, her clothes were a mess, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a month. And yet, despite all that, she had the kind of face that made you turn and stare. Sharp cheekbones, big eyes that looked a mix of green and brown and seemed to shift in color with every second, and a lush mouth that currently had the lower lip trembling. He tried not to notice the tears spilling over from those huge eyes. When she moved as if to shut the door, he stepped forward, placing his foot against the door to prevent it from being closed any further. Even with her hair in disarray, she took his breath away. Big, beautiful eyes, hair the color of honey, and curves in all the right places. She also looked exhausted, as evidenced by the dark circles under her eyes. "I don't mean to disturb you, ma'am, but I'm here about your sister." "Chelsea?" The color drained from her face. Oh, here." He stepped in and picked up the baby hugging her legs. The little boy? Chance was pretty sure he was a boy, Though with the kid still at the crawling and toothless stage, it was hard to say for sure. Anyway, the baby blinked with surprise. Before he could start crying again, Chance leaned in close. "You start that up. I'm selling you to the circus." The kid frowned. There was no way he understood the words, but surprise had quieted him down. Chance nodded at Rachel. "Chance Jacobson. I called earlier. Tried to call you back after we got disconnected, but I kept getting your voicemail." Her mouth flattened. She swiped at the tears. She had the kind of figure most women hated. Wide hips and a narrow waist and full breasts. Chance thought it was too bad she didn't dress to show it off, but then again, she clearly wasn't dressing to impress. She had on sweats and a faded pink t-shirt. "I told you I'm not—" Yeah, well, I'm not selling anything. Are these two hungry?" "Teething," Rachel sniffed. "So not completely toothless then, or at least not for much longer." Chance took the crying infant he had, murmuring nonsense to him. He got the kid into a playpen, turned, and found Rachel right behind him. He took the second baby from her and put him down next to his bro. He could see the kids were identical twins. Two sets of dark eyes stared at him. Both seemed surprised. "I know what you guys need." He headed into the kitchen. The whole house was small, very cluttered but clean, except for the kitchen. Water soaked the floor with soap suds floating merrily along. He'd deal with that in a minute. He found some sugar packets on the counter and poured one out into the palm of his hand. Then he grabbed ice from the fridge, dipped it in sugar, wrapped the cubes in paper towels, and headed back to the boys. He stuck the sweet ice cubes into each child's mouth. They shut up and started sucking. One kid fell back on his back, the other smiled around the cube. Chance turned back to their mother. At least she no longer looked like she was ready to run into the night screaming. "Where did you learn that?" She waved at the boys. "Extended family." He gestured to the kitchen mess. "I saw the water. We'll deal with that in a minute. But first, why are you crying?" "I'm just—" Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she pulled in a breath. "Sorry. It's nice to see another adult human. It's been a very long day. They're teething, I grabbed the dish soap instead of the dishwasher soap, and suds won't stop spewing everywhere, and I just mopped the kitchen floor." "Well, looks like it's going to get it again. Sit down." He gestured to a sofa covered with laundry waiting to be folded. Heading into the kitchen, he opened the dishwasher door to stop any further suds from being created. Checking the contents, he made sure that nothing was in immediate danger of being ruined. Then, after opening some cabinets, he found a bucket and mop. He grabbed the mop, got the water off the floor, and squeezed it out into the sink. He found coffee, poured 2 cups, found a bottle with 2 fingers of whiskey, and added that to her coffee. Sugar and milk would help her too. She was probably bottoming out, hadn't eaten, and needed something in her. Heading to the couch, he found her sitting there, head in her hands. He put the coffee on the coffee table, pushed the laundry away, mostly diapers, and sat. He was going to go with her desperately needing help and being the type who wouldn't ask for it. Well, he had shown up at the right time, didn't mind screaming kids, and wasn't running away. Murmuring soothing noises, he rubbed her shoulder and let her cry herself out. At least he was assuming she was crying. She kept it silent. He lectured himself sternly as his body responded to her nearness. Not that it did any good. Beneath the messy hair, stained t-shirt, and tear-blotched face was a beautiful woman. He inhaled slowly. He liked the subtle fragrance of vanilla and baby powder. She sniffled and looked up at last. "Sorry, I'm not usually such a mess." "That's okay, I am." She pushed upright, scooting away as if she needed to put some distance between them. He understood that. He was hard and trying not to show it. She looked at him, her stare direct. "What's this about Chelsea? Is she in trouble?" His mouth quirked. He couldn't help it. Rachel was hip-deep in crap, but she was worried about her sister. He shook his head. He was going to have to be careful here. This woman had his secret knight in not-so-shiny armor fantasy going, and he was not ready for the 2 kids who came attached. He pulled in a breath and started talking. When he got to the part about a baby having been taken and him and his brother looking for leads, she stiffened. "Where is Chelsea?" she demanded. "I was hoping you could tell me that." She stood. Get out." He stood as well and held up his hands in what he hoped was a friendly, I'm not armed pose. Actually, he was armed, but she didn't have to know that. "Ma'am, Don't you ma'am me. I had a husband in the military, and I know darn well what that means. Now, are you going, or am I calling the police?" Chance let out a breath. There wasn't anything more to learn here. He headed for the door, let it slam behind him with a rattle, but he made himself a promise that he would be back, with or without news of Rachel's sister. Chapter 3. Akel's mornings were usually chaotic, but today she had the added worry of Chelsea. As soon as that guy had left, she'd begun calling Chelsea's cell phone, but each time it went straight to voicemail without even ringing, and she wasn't responding to text messages either. Where was she? Was she okay? After a rough night this morning, while the boys were still asleep, she tried again, 5 times. She'd left messages every time, and panic was beginning to set in. Her sister, well, beside the boys, her sister was all the family she had left. She wanted to kick herself for falling apart yesterday in front of that stranger. It didn't help that she'd dreamed about him, about the gentle rumble of his voice, the touch of his hand, the hard muscle she'd glimpsed under his jacket. She's woken wet and aching, her fingers still tingling as if she'd been running her hands through that shaggy, warm brown hair of his that had just enough touch of sun to say he liked the outdoors. Now, she could still smell his aftershave on the diapers. Her cheeks heated. Why did she have to fall apart in front of the most gorgeous man she'd ever laid eyes upon? And why was this guy stirring up feelings she'd thought buried along with Mark? She'd loved Mark, had loved the physical intimacy that came with marriage, but since Mark's death, she had been so wrapped up first in being pregnant and then in caring for her sons, she hadn't felt even a hint of desire running through her veins. Great time for my libido to kick back in. Hurrying now, she got the diapers put away. The boys were in their playpen, happily playing for now by throwing blocks at each other. Thankfully, they both still had terrible aim and pudgy fingers that couldn't really grab well. They were pushing 8 months old now, had far more energy than she did, and they were already crawling around, getting into everything. She almost dreaded the day they started walking, because it was going to be a full tilt run with them. They were both so like Mark that sometimes it hurt. How was she ever going to handle 2 toddlers on her own? And then kids, preteens, teenagers? She'd just have to suck it up and get it done. Right now, she had to get breakfast in them, and then she'd take them to the park for an hour. That would get her at least a half-hour nap afterwards. For a second, she put her head in her hands. Exhaustion was already settling on her shoulders. What had she been thinking? Believing that she could do this on her own, sending her sister off to take a job who knew where? But Chelsea needed her own life, not Rachel's disasters. And where was Chelsea? She started to reach for her phone again, but a knocking on the door had her hurrying there. Please don't let it be bad news. Memories of the 2 servicemen who'd come to tell her about Mark still haunted her. She braced her shoulders, her chest tight and her heart pounding. Pulling open the door, she saw Mr. Gorgeous again, Chance. What a stupid name for a man, she decided. But maybe he had news about Chelsea. She didn't let him in, but she kept the door open. "Where is Chelsea?" "You know something." She saw it in his eyes. And why did any man have to have such sinfully long, sooty black eyelashes? Those lashes framed stormy, blue-gray eyes that seemed to stare right into her soul. She hated the sympathy she saw in his eyes. She didn't want anyone's pity. But then she realized this might be about Chelsea. She grabbed the sleeve of his light jacket. "What's happened?" He put a large hand over hers. "Relax. I had to stop by so I could tell you she's fine. She turned up yesterday with my brother, Seth, and she's at the hospital with him." Rachel covered her mouth with a cold hand. "She's been hurt? She turned and stared at her boys, now watching this stranger with wide eyes. "Why isn't she here? Something's wrong, isn't it?" "Can I come in? Is that coffee I smell? And don't worry. Seth's the one laid up. Your sister's fine. She's just being nice enough to stay with him. How are the Rugrats doing?" Relief swamped into her, leaving her limp. She didn't step back so much as he brushed past her. His scent. Something with a touch of salty sea spray in it. Rushing into her senses, she realized he was in her house again. Before she could stop him, and she really didn't mind even though she probably should. Where was her head? Shutting the door, she leaned on it. She waved a hand at the kitchen. "Help yourself." She had the feeling he would anyway. The man was like a force of nature, like a tidal wave that hit and swept you up and pulled you along. He came out of the kitchen with 2 mugs and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed and a tingle spread up her arm. She was too aware of him. She felt tiny next to him. Delicate, and somehow the world made a little more sense with him around, which was something she hadn't felt in a long time. The urge to lean on those broad shoulders was almost irresistible, but she'd done that once before. Had given up a career to say, "I do." And it had left her a widow with a small military pension and 2 boys. She was done leaning on others. She looked at the coffee mug so she could stop looking at him and having her insides quiver. "There's not something extra in here today, is there?" She glanced up. She had to. The corner of his mouth lifted and the lines around his eyes crinkled. He had a touch of sunburn on his cheeks as if he'd been outside a lot recently. "Why don't you sit and I'll fill you in on everything? Chelsea's gonna give you a call as soon as she can." She shook her head. "I have to feed the boys." "Good, I'll help." Her eyebrows shot up and a small shock went through her. But Chance just headed to her kitchen, calling out, "They up to pancakes yet?" "He cooks." Swallowing, she blinked hard and asked, "What was the question?" Chance poked his head out of the kitchen. "You aren't going to start crying again, are you? You were crying when I was here yesterday." Rachel hugged herself, but the words fell out. "I'm a horrible mother." He came over to her and shook his head. "No, you're a fine mother. Anyone can see that by looking at those 2 handfuls of trouble. You're just overwhelmed. Does Chelsea normally help you?" At the mention of her sister's name, Rachel stopped thinking about how miserable her own life was. "Tell me what happened to Chelsea." He headed for the kitchen again. Tony started fussing, arms lifted for her to pick him up. She grabbed him and put him in his high chair at the kitchen table. It was scarred, ancient with a linoleum top, but she loved the pink tabletop and the chrome legs. David wanted up next, so she got him into his chair and thought about how she had Chelsea to thank for these. She'd bought most of the things for the boys, had arranged a shower when Rachel was still stunned by the news that her husband had died, had gotten Rachel through the funeral, through a difficult labor, and through the first few months of a life that seemed to be nothing she'd planned for or expected. She loved the boys, but sometimes she looked back and couldn't remember the woman she had been, which was why she'd cut Chelsea loose. Chelsea needed to get on with her life, and Rachel needed the same thing. But now she stared at the big man in her kitchen with the shaggy hair who was making pancakes, pulling out milk from the fridge, opening cupboards to pull out pans and baby food, and the ache blossomed in her. This should have been Mark standing here, helping to raise his sons, boys he would never meet. Tony and David would never have a father to teach them to throw a ball, never have a dad who would push them into baseball, Mark's favorite sport. Never have so many things. She ached for them, for how life had cheated them. Rachel hung on to her coffee mug. She had to, or she'd start crying again, and she wasn't doing that in front of this guy for a second time. "You don't have to." "I know." He glanced at her and grinned. "Truth is, my mom said every guy needed to know how to cook. Hired a chef, Mike, to teach me and my brother more than the basics. But these days, I don't get to use my culinary skills enough." She stared at him, jaw slack. "Chef? Culinary?" "Yeah. Mom was a stickler for lessons. Teach 'em young should have been her motto. She was right. You put in the skills early and they stick. Got any blueberries?" Rachel shook her head. "What happened to Chelsea? You were going to explain." He talked as he mixed, got a pan heating, and started the pancakes. Rachel opened the baby food, but Tony seemed more interested in what Chance was doing in the kitchen. David had no trouble eating. It seemed Chelsea had been caught up in the baby theft that had been on the news, had been hired by the man who'd stolen the baby to look after the infant. Chance's brother, Seth, had gotten Chelsea and the baby out safely. "But my brother needs better ducking skills. Idiot let himself take a bullet." Rachel sucked in a breath. So sorry. Enemy. IED. Your husband died at once. The spoon clattered to the table. David stared at her, lower lip trembling. Chance glanced over at her and must have seen something on her face. In 2 strides, he was next to her, had his hand on her shoulder and was crouched down at eye level with her. Rachel, it's okay. I'm here to help you out. It's the least I can do since your sister's looking after my brother and well, given the way I barged in here yesterday, it's going to be okay. Really. She swallowed and blindly searched for the spoon. She was not going to lean on him. She was not going to give in to the tears pressing against the back of her eyes. And how unfair was it that when he said it would be okay, she not only wanted to believe him, but she actually did? Somehow, she felt certain that he would make it okay. She knew that as well as she knew herself. There was just something about him. But she was not going to start leaning on a man again, only to have him run off to do stupid things like fight in a senseless war. Tugging in a breath, she looked up. I know, and I think your pancakes are burning. Oh, shoot. He got up and headed for the stove. Rachel focused on feeding David. By the time he had pancakes on the table, Rachel had herself under control. Tony wanted Chance's pancakes, mouthed them and spit out more than he ate. She'd see if he'd nurse a little later, but she was trying to get both the boys onto solid food. Seeing Tony eat, David wanted some too, but he ended up waving around a piece of pancake instead of eating it. Watching Chance try to coax the boys into the joys of pancakes by making yummy sounds pulled a smile Rachel hadn't thought she was capable of anymore. Chance got a slash of baby food thrown at his face, and she let out a laugh. Now you see what my life is like. She'd be lying if she didn't admit that it was nice to share things, even if that thing was getting hit by baby missiles. He brushed at the baby food, orange carrot, on his black sweatshirt. Yeah, now I can see why you were wearing peas yesterday. It was peas, right? She nodded. I've given up on nice clothes. They all end up splattered and washed into bland colors. Chance cocked his head to the side. Is that why you were so upset when I got here? Too much food splattered on you? She shook her head. Some days it all just seems to be too much, and then the dishwasher... She trailed off. Shaking off the mood, she stood and picked up the plates. Speaking of which, I should get these washed and the boys cleaned up and dressed. Thanks for your help, and if you see Chelsea, let her know. Hold on, it sounds like you're booting me. She had syrup-stained plates in her hand, and suddenly she was too aware of her baggy sweats and formless t-shirt. She really had given up on clothes, but these were easy and the boys were tough on everything. Her included. She nodded, then said, Not booting, but, well, you don't need to stay. I can manage. His eyebrows went up, but he stood and took the plates from her. She tried to hold on, but he tugged them from her grip, took them to the sink, and then turned to her. Look, your sis is out for more than a few days looking after my brother. And my bro would have my hide. And I think Chelsea would too, if I left you in the lurch. It's kind of our fault she's not here with you now. Things could have and should have gone better with that baby recovery. He froze, seeming lost in thought before he shook it off. Granted, things could have also been a whole lot worse. So why don't you just consider me a Chelsea stand-in for a few days? She shook her head and started to clear the table, putting the butter and syrup back into the fridge. It's not necessary. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it'd make me feel better. She glanced at him sideways. Are you just saying that to make me agree? He grinned, a boyish expression that left him looking like David in one of his better moods. Yeah. Is it working? She shook her head. I really shouldn't. No, you really should. Go. Take a hot bath. A long one. I'll be out here with Butch and Sundance. Once you're done with the bath, take a nap. Then we'll take these two out. I know a great place they're going to love. It's one of those you park 'em spots. You go off, get a spa day, a manicure, all that stuff you've been missing. Does it show? He grinned again. Well, personally, I think you can't help looking great. But this is about giving you some pampering. I owe you for just showing up yesterday, and my brother owes your sister big time, but I'm letting him handle that. So what do you say? Arms crossed, she faced him. I say I know nothing about you. How do I know you're who you say you are? Or that you even know my sister? You push your way in here and act like a cereal breakfast maker? He spread his hands, palms out. I told you who I am. You want my license? My ID? She nodded. He pulled out a wallet and showed her a driver's license. She also saw he had a private investigator's license. That did it. She was not getting involved with any man who picked a profession that made him likely to get himself shot. She pressed her lips tight. He was one of those guys who couldn't stay away from the action, just like Mark. Boy, could she pick him. She flushed hot. She wasn't picking this guy, but his offer was tempting. A spa day, a day with the boys being worn out by fun. She'd had to watch her budget. 2 babies were far more expensive than 1. But if he was willing to pay, and if he felt that he owed her and Chelsea... When can I talk to Chelsea? She asked. He shrugged. Probably this afternoon or tonight. Seth's out of surgery, but she's hanging close to him. Last I heard, she didn't have her cell phone on her, but hopefully that will change soon. You could probably get through to Seth's room, and I bet she'd answer. Chelsea weighed her options. Her sister was safe for the moment, and when was the last time she'd had some time to herself? She nodded. I'll take that bath. Then we'll call Chelsea and see about the rest of it. He stuck out his hand. Deal. He had a good grip, not too strong and not too weak. Dry palms and long fingers and a graceful turn to narrow wrists, the hands of a man who should play the piano or be a painter, she thought. What would those long fingers feel like brushing over? Shutting down her imagination, she told herself to keep focused on him being a larger-than-usual babysitter. Her body might yearn for a man's touch, but she was not falling for another guy who put himself on the front lines of anything. Mark had been wonderful, but she didn't need another man who wouldn't come home. Mark hadn't even known she was pregnant, nor had she, when he'd been deployed. And she was not putting her 2 little boys through loss again. Rachel? She straightened and realized she still had hold of Chance's hand. Jerking her hand away, she rubbed her palm on her sweats. Sorry, I must be more tired than I thought. I'm going to go grab that bath. Chapter 4. C. Hans watched Rachel take off down a short hallway at almost a run. Those sweats outlined her curves in ways she probably didn't realize. He glanced down at the twins in their high chairs. One of them was fussing in what looked like a diaper dance. So, Tony, my man, how about some dry britches? He was going to assume this was Tony. He was pretty sure David was the one with pancake all over his front. He'd get them into different tops, and that would help him tell them apart. But he was pretty sure, too, that David was a touch bigger. Tony was the one with a hot wire spark in his eyes that said he'd be the troublemaker in this family. Chance tried not to hear the bathwater running and tried not to think about Rachel naked. Those luscious breasts of hers, those wide hips. Thoughts of what she'd look like wearing nothing threw him off. Shaking his head at his lack of control, he told the boys. Okay, who's first? Tony waved his arms, so he started there, but then David started pounding his fists on his high chair. It was a juggling act after that, moving from one demanding kid to the other. He finally got them into clean diapers. Thank you, Cousin Ellie, for insisting every man needed to learn that skill. And clean tops and pants. He was sweating by the time he finished. No wonder Rachel was exhausted. These 2 could wear out anyone on a good day. He could well imagine what she'd been going through with the pair teething at the same time. He'd have been crying too. He heard splashing and focused on getting the boys amused with something. Blocks looked boring to him, so he got out a couple of stuffed bears only to learn that those bored the boys. But he finally found a couple of trucks that they seemed to like. And while they were entertained with those, he started to construct a city with the blocks, while the twins looked on with rapt attention. The boys seemed to like crashing stuff he built up, and that was good enough for Chance. In fact, he'd be lying if he didn't admit that he was enjoying himself. He kept the boys out and crawling around the living room, chasing after their trucks while he zoomed them around and created towers for them to topple. When he started seeing eyelids droop, he got them settled on the couch in little chairs of their own and put on something educational on TV. Looked like a giant yellow critter teaching the alphabet. That was good, right? The boys stared at the TV, fascinated by all the bright colors and music, and Chance headed down the hall. He hadn't heard or seen Rachel get out of the tub yet. Glancing into one open door, he saw a bedroom that had to be Rachel's. The living room might be plain, but here bright, vibrant colors were splashed everywhere. Deep red curtains, pillows covered in yellow and orange, a four-poster bed showing off a comforter of quilted fabrics in brilliant hues of red, brown, and orange. The dark chocolate color on the opposing wall gave the room a warm feel. It was the room of a woman who hid her passions, kept herself secret, he thought. He turned the other way and found another bedroom set up with two cribs, then a closed door that had to be the bathroom. He knocked and heard a splash. "You okay in there?" Yeah. He was willing to bet she'd fallen asleep. The door opened and she poked her head out. Her hair was pulled up and falling in curling tendrils around her face. Her skin looked pink from the hot bath. Steam curled out around her, and she had a towel wrapped around her that showed off curvy, bare legs. His mouth went dry. His heart skipped a couple of beats, and he could only stare. She looked good enough to eat. When a drop of water had run down her neck to disappear beneath the towel, Chance had wanted to trace its path with his tongue in the worst way. What is it about this woman that gets to me? His self-control was in danger of disappearing. He'd thought she was good-looking. He'd had no idea. And he wanted her. That was not a good idea. He wasn't ready to settle down, he wasn't looking for a ready-made family, and he wasn't taking on a woman who had to be the type who needed a stay-at-home guy. Now he just wished his body would catch up with his brain on all that because all he could think about was how he wanted to touch her in the worst possible way. And he suspected that if he ever got to touch her, he wouldn't ever want to stop. Chapter 5. R. Echo kept the towel wrapped around her with one hand. She was trying to cover as much of her body as she could. She had 20 extra pounds on her hips, stretch marks on her stomach, sagging breasts, and the beginnings of cellulite trying to show on her thighs. She hadn't been to the gym in more than a year, and her body was telling on her. She'd also fallen asleep in the tub. Embarrassed and only wanting him to move so she could go get dressed, she nodded. "I'm okay. I'll be out in a minute." She shut the door and listened for his steps moving away. Slipping out of the bathroom, she made it to her bedroom, her body still hot and lazy from the bath. That had been heaven, and worth anything. She dug through her drawers until she found a soft and clean t-shirt dress in a pale blue. She slipped it on, then gathered up all the dirty clothes on the floor and tossed them in the laundry basket. A hairbrush through her hair, pulled back and up again, and a dash of makeup and some flat ballet shoes, and she felt more human than she had in months. She headed back to the living room to find the boys, all three of them, lined up on the couch. Chance seemed to be watching whatever held the twins entranced. A smile curved her mouth even as the twinge of heartache caught at her. This was how it was supposed to be. A husband, a father for the boys, someone here to help her. She pushed the longing away and her shoulders back. She wasn't going to start feeling sorry for herself. She'd done enough of that. "I need to call my sister." Before she could finish, Chance was up and pulling his phone out. Scrolling through what looked to be his contacts, he handed her the phone. "Ask for Seth Jacobson's room." Nodding her head, she held the phone to her ear. Seriously, does everything he owns smell like him? Turning her back on him, she gave the hospital operator his brother's name and listened as the phone rang and rang. When no one answered, she disconnected the call, unsure what to do next. She was lost in thought when she felt his warm hand on her arm. Taking his phone from her, he pocketed it. "Maybe she stepped out of the room. You can try again later. So, how about that bit of fun and relaxation I promised?" Decision made, she nodded her head. "Let me grab my purse and the diaper bag, and then I'll be ready to go. Do you mind taking my car? I've got the car seat set up in the Volvo, and they're a pain to move." He nodded and swung one of the boys, Tony, up in his arms, and her heart did a little patter when her son leaned his head against Chance's shoulder. "Volvo? Seriously? You fell for those safety studies?" She slapped a stare on him and grabbed David. "I did my research, and Chelsea helps with the car payments. She said she didn't want me stranded somewhere with a clunker. You sure she's doing okay?" "You can try to call her again later. Right now, why don't you let me drive so you can sit back and enjoy the ride? She hesitated at the door, biting her lower lip. This guy was a stranger, really, so why didn't it feel like it with him? He was easy to be around, and she had to admit it. She really needed a helping hand. While she'd wanted her sister to have her own life, it had been a mistake to go it alone with the boys, even for a few days. She was in way over her head, but she had to hope things would get better, eventually. She dug out her car keys and offered them up. You get a ding on it and you'll be fixing it too. With a grin, he headed outside, bouncing Tony as he walked. Rachel followed with David at a little more sedate pace. Once she had the boys strapped in, grinning and squealing since they loved rides, she slipped into the passenger seat. She had 100 things she wanted to ask this man, and no idea if it would be prying. But she had to say something. Glancing at him, studying his profile with that very straight nose and strong jaw, she asked, "So, what is it you do?" He looked at her sideways. "Come on. You saw my license. I'm a PI, but I used to be with the Bureau." "Like in chests? Furniture?" He grinned. "Like in Federal Bureau of Investigation. A FEBI. Hated the work, so I left, and my brother Seth has me doing work for him. He and his partner, Sean Marshall, run a security agency called MJI. Most of the time, it's installing cameras, sensors. Sometimes it's escort duty. A lot of the time, it's online research, and that's boring as all get out." She gave a hum and nodded. He laughed. "You don't believe me, do you?" "Do you carry a gun?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah. I've got a concealed carry permit to go with it, and Seth likes everyone to check out at the range once a month." "Are you going to tell me you carry it just for show?" "Guns mean danger. I don't care where you are in this world." "Got news for you. Bad things find you wherever you are. Look at your sister. I don't think she went looking for trouble, but she found it. From what I heard, your sister was a real firecracker. Saved the day. She definitely saved my brother. Ah, here we are. Tots and toes." Rachel glanced out the window. Chance had pulled up in a strip mall. Half of it was dedicated to a children's play area. In front of them stood a brightly colored sign that read just that, Tots and Toes. One side of the storefront seemed to be glass, with children running around and college-age girls watching them. The other side looked to be a salon. Chance waved at it. The advantages of having an extended family. Cousin Ellie raves about the place, swears she couldn't live without coming once a month. Wondering how she could be gracious about this, Rachel clutched her purse strap. I think I'll just look around today." Chance shook his head, got out and came around to her door. "You're getting the full deluxe special, whatever that is. The boys will have a day to wear themselves out, and I'll head over to the hospital to see how Seth's doing and let your sister know you're trying to reach her." He had the door open and his hand held out to her. She shook her head, but he didn't move. "Really, I can't." "Really, you can. Think of this as payback. Your sister saved my brother's life. If you're going to get shot, you really do want a nurse standing next to you. So, this is on the Jacobsons. Actually, I'm putting it on the company credit card, so you don't have to worry that I'm out of pocket on this one." Rachel licked her lips. It was tempting. A day to get her nails done? And her hair? And maybe a massage? When was the last time she'd done anything to look after herself? She couldn't remember, and that was more than sad. With a smile, she put her hand in his. That instant tingle that came from his touch warmed her fingers and spread up her arm. She stood, but he didn't let go of her hand. For a moment, they stood beside the Volvo, her hand in his. She stood close enough to him that she could smell his aftershave with that touch of ocean spray in it. His eyes seemed more blue than gray right now, and she watched them darken as his pupils widened. The breath caught in her chest with a hard hitch, and her face warmed. She didn't want to let go of him, but Tony or David set up a howl about being neglected. Pulling away, she unharnessed David and got him out and into her arms. Chance moved around to the other side of the Volvo and got Tony out. They walked into Tots and Toes. A girl with long blonde hair and the kind of figure Rachel used to have smiled and walked up to them. "I'm Julie. And who have we here? Two darling twins? Have you been here before, Mr. and Mrs.?" Rachel's face scalded. We're not. That is, he's not. I'm not. Shifting Tony to his hip, Chance stuck out his hand. I'm Chance, this is Rachel. And these two are Tony and David. Good luck telling them apart, but if there's trouble, my bet is David started it and Tony's the one who goes. Rachel stared at him. How did he already know the boys so well? The girl led the way to a desk, gave them forms to fill out and sign, releases and information. Rachel got most of them done, but left the doctor's information blank. I'm going to be here while they are. The blonde flashed a brilliant smile. Perfect. Let me take you to Bethany. Take your time, Rachel. Have fun. I'll see you in like 4 hours, so go wild with the pampering. Oh, and Julie, she's not paying. I'll settle up when I get back. Rachel, you don't mind me. He let the words trail and dangled her car keys. She waved a hand. Be my guest. It seems I'll be busy. With a grin, he headed out. Julie leaned close. That's quite a hunk you've got there. Great with kids, too. And anyone could see he's smitten with you. Skin scalding now, Rachel could only smile back. She couldn't even get the words out that Chance wasn't hers. And oh, why not? It wasn't a bad thing if this young, slim, pretty thing was jealous of her having a guy like Chance. She saw the boys settled into playing. David wanted to hang back at first, but as soon as Rachel put Tony on the floor, he crawled straight for the building blocks and cars. He was either destined to be a mechanic or an architect, or maybe a construction worker. Once David saw Tony sitting down and starting to play with the blocks, he wiggled and wanted to go with him. Rachel left him with his brother. Julie smiled at her. These two are adorable, but they must be a handful. You have no idea. Now, what's better? Start with a manicure, a pedicure, or a shampoo and cut? Chapter 6. Chance timed the 4 hours and headed for the hospital to check on his brother, who was still sleeping off his surgery. He'd taken a bullet that ended up tearing up his appendix. Thankfully, the surgeon was able to remove the bullet and clean up the mess it made, but he'd need time to recover. Chance rubbed his right side, remembering his own near miss, or rather, near hit he took to his torso. Gut shots were always painful and took their own sweet time to heal, but judging from what he saw at the hospital, Seth didn't need him. Chelsea had looking after him more than covered, and Chance was going to bet there was more going on between those two than friendship. He stopped by his place to shower and change, and since he had time, he went grocery shopping. Rachel's cupboards hadn't been exactly bare, but he also wouldn't call them stocked with excess. Those two boys might still be on mostly milk and formula, but what Rachel was eating looked to be oatmeal and eggs and not much else. He picked up a couple of steaks, pasta, a few things from the deli, and fresh bread from a bakery that knew him well. Since he was there, he got a few cases of baby food, and since there was a toy store next to Tots and Toes, he picked up a couple of giant stuffed animals and some more trucks. What little guy could ever have enough wheels? Heading into Tots and Toes, he saw the boys looking heavy-eyed but still struggling to keep up with some of the older kids. Rachel sat in the waiting area, and he had to look twice to make sure it was her. The honey gold hair was out of its band and was cut short to frame her face. She looked relaxed. Gone was the pale skin and the pinched mouth and the red eyes. Even with all that, she'd been attractive. Now any modeling agency would sign her in a heartbeat. He came up to her. I like the hair. Turning to him, she looked up, her cheeks pinked. She fluffed her hair with one hand. I told them I wanted something easy to maintain, something I could live with a little better. It's great. Now how about dinner? I'm cooking. Well, before she could finish the protest, the boys turned. They'd heard Rachel's voice, and David set up an almost cry that Tony was soon echoing. Rachel walked over and picked them up, one at a time, nuzzling their little faces and murmuring to them softly while Chance looked on. Did they feed them here? Chance asked. Doesn't matter. They're always hungry. Come on, tigers, we're going for a ride. That had both boys perking up. Even so, they fretted on the ride home. Rachel glanced at the bags in the back, but didn't say anything until she'd gotten the boys settled in high chairs with bottles, and Chance was bringing in grocery bags. Chance gave her a questioning glance. Hey, What's that look for? I asked for paper. She shook her head. It's not the bags that worry me, it's what's in them. I can't afford all this. And if you tell me one more time that you and your brother owe me, you'll what? He could see her visibly stiffen, and he instantly wanted to soothe her. Softening his voice, he said, I like good food, and I'm not about to starve myself. You're getting in on some of that. Now wait until you taste my steak Sinatra, and I think you have a bottle emergency going on over there. Rachel turned with a muffled curse. David had his bottle in his hand and was about to bash his brother with it. She swooped in just in time to get it out of his fingers and stop a battle before it began. The boys kept her busy while Chance started dinner. No way was he giving her time to protest. He was starving and she had to eat too. She took the boys in for baths, and next Chance saw them, they were in jammies with heads nodding. I'm just going to put them in their cribs, Rachel said. She came back a few minutes later with a baby monitor in one hand. She rubbed the back of her other hand over her forehead, pushing back the now short hair. Phew. Who knew a day of pampering could be so exhausting? But I think they'll sleep. He handed her a glass of Cabernet. Here, you earned this. I can't have much. I'm still nursing, but one glass is okay. You ready to eat? She helped him get out plates, and he served up the buttered pasta with the sirloin cut up on top. Garlic, fresh chopped parsley, and fresh Parmesan finished the dish, and the crusty Italian bread would soak up the butter. At the table, he told her, I went to the hospital to check on Seth and Chelsea. My brother was still sleeping off his surgery, and Chelsea was doing fine, but she wanted to stick around the hospital to keep an eye on Seth. Evidently, my badass brother kicked up a bit of a fuss at having to stay in the hospital, and she was worried that he'd try to walk out of there on his own if he wasn't supervised. Oh, and she said to tell you that she has her cell phone back and she got all your messages. Rachel chuckled at that. That definitely sounds like something my sister would do. Should I call her? Chance shrugged his shoulders. From the little time I spent at the hospital, cell coverage is splotchy at best, but you can always try to ring his room again. Last I heard, as soon as he's released, she was planning on taking Seth home and getting him settled. Rachel's eyebrows rose high. Home? That sounds... Yeah, it is. My brother's not the impulsive type. In fact, I've never known Seth to move this fast on a girl, but it is what it is. Rachel frowned and Chance waved a fork at her plate. Steak dry? Pasta limp? No, you know it's perfect. Well, I worry about Chelsea. She hasn't had many boyfriends before this. She's the serious one in the family. It's always been about the career for her. And you? He twirled the fettuccine on his fork. You're not serious? What did you do before you got busy with twins? She let out a breath and a wistful smile. Don't laugh. I was in real estate. Why should I laugh? He poured her more wine and him too. You any good at it? I was great. I specialized in high-end resorts, and we're not talking houses here, but multi-million-dollar deals. I knew everything. That was my thing. I always found the right property for the right buyer at the right price. And you gave it up? Why? She glanced at the bedroom. Looking back at him, she shrugged. Kids, mostly. Mark was supportive, but then he was gone so fast. And then I had a rough pregnancy, and suddenly the boys were here. And well, life. Do you mind if I call Chelsea? He nodded and stood. Go ahead. I'll clean up and make sure there are no more dishwasher disasters. Seth's room is on my speed dial, so just use my phone. He gave Rachel his cell phone. She headed into the living room, but he heard her voice from the kitchen. Her tone started out worried, moved to just concern, and finally headed to happy. It was odd how he knew her tones so well, as if he'd known her forever, and not just a day or so. She gave a laugh and came back to hand him his phone. Everything okay? He asked. Rachel shrugged. Who knows? Chelsea's planning to stay with Seth from the sound of it. You mentioned something about fast. Well, I've never heard Chelsea sound so soppy over a guy. Chance smiled. That a technical term? Soppy? She nodded. Chelsea is usually that way over babies, not guys. She told me to kiss the twins for her. And The sentence was left hanging. Chance looked up from where he'd been loading the dishwasher after rinsing the plates. And? Rachel's mouth pulled down. She waved a hand as if she was feeling helpless about something. She said I'd better let you help out until she could come see me, which might be a while. And she said she and Seth are talking about a getaway. She mentioned something about an Alaskan cruise. My sister wants to go on a cruise with the guy she just met. With a nod, Chance finished loading the dishwasher and shut the door. Cruises can be fun. Bit too much time to spend on a boat if you ask me, but I'm betting the fall colors will be great. And it sounds like you're stuck with me for… how long? A week. She threw her arms wide. But that's just while he starts to recover. Chance grinned. There are worse things, you know. Now, are we having ice cream for dessert or just popcorn and a movie? Chapter 7. R. Ickle stared at Chance. He made it sound so simple. An easy thing to do. Chelsea had made taking care of the twins seem easy too. Standing in the middle of the room, she made a decision. It was time for her to take back her life. And that included figuring out how to handle 2 8-month-old babies on her own and support herself and the boys. She gave a nod. She was taking back her life, starting now. From now on, she would hold herself together without needing anyone else. Thanks, but I think I'll just have an early night to bed. Chance's eyebrows lifted and Rachel's face warmed. She hadn't meant bed with him, but he was thinking about it, and now she was too. Narrowing her eyes, she decided she didn't like the added stress the sexual tension was creating in her world. Solution. Chance needed to leave. Striding to the front door, she pulled it open. You've done enough for me and the boys. Thank you. It wasn't gracious, but she couldn't think what else to do. Chance just smiled at her and crossed his arms. How about a deal? I'll come over, give you some time to yourself, and cook dinner for, say, the next couple of weeks. She shook her head. 2 weeks with a terrific, handsome man cooking for her. She wouldn't survive that long. Thanks, but… Dropping his arms to his side, he stepped over to face her. No buts. It's going to be longer than a week before Seth is fit enough to go anywhere with Chelsea, and then they'll be gone another week. Now, are you telling me you couldn't use a free babysitter and some home cooking that's not your own? She bit her lower lip. She could use all of that, but it had to be on her terms. Afternoons only. You have something come up? Call me, I'll understand. This next week only. He stuck out his hand. 2 weeks, and another day at Tots and Toes. His eyes warmed, his eyebrows lifted up, and she found she couldn't resist that pleading expression. She was going to be a pushover for the boys too, she knew. She gave a nod and put her hand in his. His grip was firm, his skin warm, and for a second she wanted nothing more than to step forward, let those strong arms wrap around her. How long had it been since anyone had held her? Had stroked her hair and whispered sweet things to her? She pushed away the thought. She didn't need that from a guy who wouldn't stick around, who had the kind of career that put him in danger. She pulled her hand away. Chance stuffed his hands into his pockets. He gave a shrug, then pulled out his wallet and took out a card. You need anything? Anything. Help with the twins, the toilet overflows, or you just need some milk and can't get to the store. Promise you'll call. Taking the card, she stared at him. I still don't understand why you're doing all this. He lifted one shoulder and hand. It's a great chance for me to polish up my shining armor and get the old white Charger out of the stable. I don't get enough practice at being a hero. I doubt that. She muttered the words. With a sudden move, he leaned down and put his mouth on hers. He brushed his tongue across the seam of her lips. A shiver ran over her skin. Her insides began to shake and her heart thudded loud in her ears. She had to grab something solid to ground herself, so she grabbed his arm. Solid muscle tensed under her grip. Chance placed a hand behind her neck, rubbing his thumb against the side of her neck, setting off a wave of heat that torched her body. She could feel he was holding back. God help her if he ever let go, because she wouldn't be a passive passenger on that ride. Tilting his head, he deepened the kiss for a few seconds and then pulled back. He took a step away. He was smiling. I'm not always a good guy, Rachel. Rachel could do nothing but stare up at him. She still had hold of his arm. She pulled away, brushed at her now short hair. She'd never been kissed like that. Never. Like she was something to cherish, something to devour. Rachel? She looked up. Chance was staring at her, his blue-gray eyes seeming to see everything she wanted to hide. She grabbed the doorknob for the front door and swept a hand as if she could scoot him out. You'd better go. See you tomorrow. Rachel nodded. She couldn't say anything else because if she opened her mouth again, she would ask him to stay. With a crooked smile and a nod, he headed out the door. She watched him get into his car, start the engine, and drive off. Closing the door, she leaned her back against it. Would a fling with him be so bad, really? But she knew the truth. When she and Mark had finally started dating in high school, she had simply known that she'd wanted to marry him and spend her life with him. She'd wanted to grow old with him. It hadn't worked out the way she'd planned. If she was being honest with herself, she wouldn't change the time they'd had together, but she might have pressed harder for him not to join the military, to find a safer job. But she couldn't change the past. All she could do was decide what she wanted her future to hold. Here was Chance, a guy setting off rockets inside her. Another guy with the ability to rattle her world. Well, she'd stuck her head in the sand and had acted as if nothing bad could ever happen with one man. She knew better now. She was not doing that again. Chance was a guy who liked danger and trouble. That would eventually catch up to him. If she ever got involved with a guy again, it would be with a plumber or someone who sold insurance or an accountant, maybe. Heck, she might get back into real estate. She'd kept her license, and she could look for a guy in that line of work. She was not letting herself in for it with Chance. Even his name was a warning. She let out a long breath. All those were reasonable thoughts, but her body was telling her she was a liar, and what she wanted was that man. Shaking her head, she pushed off the door. If she was going to get her life back in shape, she'd better start with the laundry that always needed doing. She was also going to throw out all her baby food-stained clothes, and she was not going to keep thinking about Chance Jacobson. Chapter 8. Tea-hat kiss with Rachel left Chance ready to do something, and since that something couldn't be taking Rachel to bed, he headed for MJI. Sean was still there, burning the midnight oil with paperwork by the looks of it. Seth and Sean had set up a firm when they'd gotten out of the military. Chance knew better than to ask either man what they'd done with their time in the SEALs. Some things you just didn't talk about. He wondered what Sean's wife, Janet, thought about him pulling such late hours. Was she worried for him? Or, given that she poked her nose into the business from time to time, did she understand? He briefly wondered if she might be someone Rachel could confide in. He rubbed his head, reminding himself that it wasn't his business. Rachel had her own life to lead, and he had his. Pouring himself a mug of coffee, Chance settled on the leather couch in Sean's office. Seth might opt for simplicity if he was choosing for himself. The space had a reception area and 4 offices, 2 of which were used for storage right now, and a gym next door that stayed open 24/7. But Chance could see Janet's touches in here. Curtains over the blinds, comfortable chairs and the leather sofa, a huge oak desk, photos of Denver hung on the wall, and Sean's honorable discharge framed, along with 2 of his medals. Janet had said clients needed to know they were hiring the best, and Chance knew Sean was secretly proud of those hard-earned honors. Looking up from his computer, Sean leaned back in his chair. Make yourself at home. You do know you could have your own office here for the asking. Chance sipped the coffee. It had gone bitter from sitting too long on the burner. He grimaced. I have an office. At home. And I like being freelance. How many times am I going to have to tell you that? Sean grinned. Unlike Seth, who looked former military, Sean went out of his way to fit into Denver's more laid-back, liberal crowd. His hair was a little too long. His shirts were often plaid, and he went for jeans and boots. He looked more like a construction worker than a military man today, Chance thought. Then he glanced down at his own jeans and boots, and plaid shirt. Okay, so it was typical Denver attire. He sipped his coffee. Sean folded his hands across a belly that wasn't showing any signs of thickening. You only have to accept the offer, and then I'll stop asking. Chance couldn't decide if he wanted him to stop asking, so he changed the subject. So, what's being done about Bressie? Chance asked. Any word about that baby snatcher? More to the point, do you think Trent has any word about the guy? Last we heard, Bressie had hopped his jet for Italy. Trent has an investigator monitoring his activities, but it looks like he's busy putting out business fires that Trent has set. Laughing, Sean shook his head and sat up. Probably wasn't the smartest decision to threaten that man's family. Chance chuckled. Remind me never to get on his bad side. Sean nodded in response. Marco Bressie had a grudge against Trent Caldwell that dated back a long time. For a while, his attempts at revenge had been centered around business, which Trent had handled mostly calmly, but when he'd kidnapped Trent's newborn daughter, he'd gone too far. The kidnapping was also why Seth ended up with a bullet lodged in his gut when he'd tracked Bressie down and gone to retrieve the baby. If it wasn't for Chelsea's quick thinking, well, Chance didn't know what he'd do to Bressie if Seth had died. His hand tightened around his coffee mug. Yeah, it wouldn't be pretty. Hopefully, Trent could focus on the good, that Seth and Chelsea had brought baby Faith back home safely, and leave Bressie to stew. Standing, Sean headed over to the coffee, sniffed it, threw out the last of it in the sink, and started to make fresh a pot. Any idea when Bressie will be back? He's got holdings here. Sean flipped the coffee maker on. He turned back to Chance and leaned his hips on the counter that held the small sink, a minibar and fridge, and the all-important coffee maker. Up to Trent and Brianna. Brianna pulled me aside today. Wants me to set up a meeting between Trent and Bressie for them to hash things out. She wants to put everything associated with Bressie behind them, and she doesn't think Trent will be able to let it go. Oh, like the guy will believe anything Trent says? Chance shook his head. Marco's going to go on blaming Trent for the breakup with his little girl and her suicide. He refuses to even consider that Trent broke up with her because she was cheating on him, and that the baby she was pregnant with when she died wasn't Trent's. Sean shrugged. Long as he goes on being irrational from a different continent, he can think what he wants. Seth tell you he plans on disappearing with Chelsea for a week? He grinned. I always warned him that when he fell, it'd be fast and furious. I love it when I'm right. Shaking his head, Chance finished his coffee. How many times are you going to tell him that? Oh, probably 100. If I ever see the guy. Seth's going to be laid up and out for at least a couple of months, and even when he will be back, chances are he'll be forced into jobs with the least likelihood of getting shot. That's only if you and the docs have their way. And probably Chelsea. Nice to have a nurse with him. Oh, I'm going to be hanging close to her sister. Someone had to step in and help her out, and Chelsea's got her hands full with Seth. Sean's eyebrows lifted, and he cocked his head to one side. Chance knew that look. Sean appointed himself surrogate dad to anyone who'd let him. Since he'd married Janet, he also had become an advocate for every man getting himself a good woman. When are you seeing her again? Sean asked. His voice came across as neutral, but Chance still didn't like the speculation in his eyes. And that is any of your business. How? Chance stood and took his mug to the sink. Maria, the office manager at the firm, had been on everyone's case about rinsing their mugs. She was someone you didn't want on your case for long. She had a way of looking at you with big, brown eyes that left you feeling like you'd been caught beating puppies. You like her. A smile twitched Sean's lips. The urge to punch that smile lifted in Chance, but he'd only be giving Sean some ammo. Geez, what are we, in high school? I'm not having a locker room discussion with you. Right, Sean said, his tone dry and knowing. He slapped Chance on the back. I'll let you know if and or when Bressie pings our radar. We might need to have a little conversation with our Italian friend. I'd rather prevent any more problems so we don't have to deal with him. Chance nodded. That was why Seth and Sean's security business was doing so well. The company had a reputation for anticipating problems, keeping events and lives running smoothly, which reminded him of Rachel. Her life was anything but smooth right now. He started for the door. If he was going to help her out, he needed to get some sleep. He'd be pulling late nights with her. That had him thinking of her in bed. Shifting gears, he turned back to Sean. Hey, you got any morning work? Let me know. For now, I'm going to put some time in at the gym. Right, Sean said, voice still dry and knowing. Chance headed out to punch something since he couldn't punch Sean without the guy punching back, and maybe, just maybe, he'd be able to sleep without dreaming of Rachel and how he ached to kiss her again. Chapter 9. R. Akel heard a car pull up into the driveway. She glanced out, praying that it would be Chance and hoping it wasn't. It had been a week with him coming over every day, and she was getting so that she looked forward to every visit, and not just for the meals he prepared. Chance made the boys laugh. He kept them entertained, gave Rachel time to look after herself. She'd been able to catch up on housework, and she'd even started some job hunting on her computer. If she looked tired, he bullied her into naps. If she was ready to tear her hair out, he'd pack her and the boys up, take them all to Tots and Toes or to the park, and she'd have time enough to unwind. He hadn't kissed her again. He'd been the perfect gentleman, and that was driving her nuts. Today it was only 11 in the morning. The boys had had her up since 4. She finally had them fed, cleaned, and down for a nap, and she was already exhausted. She glanced out the window and saw Chelsea step out of a black SUV. That wasn't her car. She came around and helped a man out. He looked military, short hair, lots of muscle, a face pulled down right now with impatience and pain. Chelsea said something to the guy. A smile lightened his face, and he put an arm over Chelsea's shoulder. For a moment, the two looked happy and lost in their own world. Rachel's heart tightened. She'd had that once. She gripped the drapery. Her sister deserved to be happy, and if this man did it for her, more power to her. Letting go of the drapes, she headed to the door and pulled it open. Hey, Chels, welcome back. Chelsea and the guy with her, Seth, Rachel assumed, headed up the walkway. Rachel caught Chelsea's hand and then stood back to admire the gorgeous man who still had his arm over Chelsea's shoulders. They came inside. Rachel shut the door and Chelsea grinned. She waved at the man next to her, the one still hanging on to her even though he didn't look as if he needed the support. Rachel, this is Seth Jacobson. Seth, this is my sister Rachel Swanson. Seth shook her hand. Nice to meet you. Chelsea's told me all about you. I understand you have a pair of youngsters around here? He glanced around the living room, which looked a wreck. The boys had been having one of their days of throwing every toy as far as they could and knocking things over. Rachel hugged her arms to herself. They're napping. A cry from the bedroom and the baby monitor disproved that. Rachel rolled her eyes. Well, they were napping. Sounds like it's now lunchtime. Oh, let me help. Chelsea began, but Rachel held up a hand. I've got it. Chance said you two were going to take a little vacation. Turning to her sister, she smiled and caught Chelsea's hand. Can I do anything to help you pack? Hey, you don't get rid of me that fast. Chelsea slipped out from under Seth's arm and headed for the baby's room. Rachel waved at the couch, grabbed the clean diapers waiting to be folded off the cushions. Have a seat? Can I get you some coffee? Before he could answer, Chelsea came out with a baby in each arm. They're getting too big for this. Tony rubbed at his eyes, and David stared at the stranger in the living room, his lower lip starting to tremble. Rachel grabbed him and touched his cheek so he would look at her. These two wake cranky every time. Holding out his arms, Seth asked, Can I? Reluctantly, Rachel gave David over to Seth. For a moment, David's lip trembled even more. He reached for his mother, but Seth swung him up high and brought him down. David's eyes widened. Then Tony set up a cry and reached for Seth, wanting in on the action. Rachel frowned. Her boys were obviously getting too used to having a guy around. Grinning, Seth grabbed Tony too, but Chelsea pulled him from Seth's arms. You only get both of them if you're sitting down. You heard what the doctor said about pulling out your stitches again. Rachel's eyebrows flew high. Again? She decided not to ask. Heading to the kitchen, she got coffee poured and set up on a tray and bottles warmed. She came back out to find Seth on the couch, one boy either side of him, and toy trucks in his hands. At least the boys were learning how to share. She hoped that continued when they eventually hit their terrible twos. Chelsea came over and took the tray from her. Why don't you sit down and let me handle this? And I love your hair. With a grin, Chelsea took the tray. In moments, she got coffee into everyone's hands and a bottle into David's mouth, which decided Tony that he wanted lunch too. But he wanted it from Seth, who seemed to have no trouble bottle feeding a squirming baby. Looking up, he smiled at Rachel. Big family. I had younger cousins pushed at me before they could walk and learned to change diapers way too young. She smiled back. Your brother has said much the same thing. Sounds like you both were taught well. Agreeing with her, Seth admitted, Chance took to it all much better than I did. He's way better with kids and, admittedly, the better cook. Chelsea elbowed Seth lightly. So what you're saying is he really is the better brother? Scoffing, he turned to glare at her sister, who was all smiles, patting his thigh. Don't worry, I know you're the better brother. For me. Chelsea then gave Rachel a pointed look. She could feel her cheeks pinking up. So, when do you leave on your cruise? Today, Seth said at the same time Chelsea said, tomorrow. Chelsea shot him a look. It's undecided other than it won't be a cruise. The doctor doesn't think it would be a good idea, so we decided to go somewhere more local and then take a cruise another time. Oh, maybe you can come with us. Wouldn't that be fun? Seth shook his head and shifted Tony to a more comfortable wiggling spot. Seems we have a difference of opinion on a few things. Chelsea wrinkled her nose. He wants to fly up today to Aspen. I'm all for driving and taking our time. Trying not to smile, Rachel sipped her coffee. Only the second cup she'd had today. She had a dozen questions she wanted to ask both Seth and her sister, but she was going to try to be good and not push. These two, they looked right. She was glad Seth seemed to like kids, because Chelsea loved them. And the look in Seth's eyes when he glanced at Chelsea, he might not have said the words out loud, but Rachel could see the love shining there, which meant she had to get these two out of here. If Chelsea thought for 1 minute that Rachel was floundering, she would drop everything and come running. Rachel wasn't about to let that happen, not when Chelsea was already exactly where she needed to be. Chelsea finished feeding David and shifted him to over her shoulder to burp him. How's it going with Chance? Is he helping out enough? Chelsea's stare roamed the room, and Rachel knew her sister was seeing disorder, but no dust. And she'd had time to vacuum this week, too. Rachel grinned. You need to be thinking about what you're going to wear. It's not ski season yet, but we might get an early snow. Do you have enough sweaters? She shifted the conversation to the upcoming trip. There were obviously a few things these two had yet to work out. Seth was happy to make use of Trent Caldwell's company jet. Some friend, Rachel thought. Chelsea kept pushing for the drive so they could have more time together. Seth reminded her that they'd have plenty of time together at the chalet they would be using in Aspen, complete with an on-site cook and housekeeper. Chelsea wrinkled her nose again over the extravagance, even if they weren't paying for it. Since they were the ones who had rescued baby Faith, Trent was all too happy to give them a dream vacation. Seth threatened to take up horseback riding while they were there. They argued as if they'd been married for 20 years, but Rachel caught Chelsea's sneaking touches. She'd lean over to wipe milk off Tony's face, but her fingers would linger on Seth's arms. He sat with one leg pressed up against Chelsea's. They more than needed to get a room. Taking the boys from them, she got Tony and David settled in their playpen with only a few shrill protests. You two need to scoot if you're leaving today. And Chelsea, how often do you get to fly in a private jet? Chelsea looked like she wanted to argue about that, but Rachel leaned forward, kissed her cheek, and told her, Go for it, girl. Whispering back, Chelsea said, Okay. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. It was an old joke between them, and Rachel's chest tightened. Their mom had been the one to push them to try every new thing under the sun, to get out there and live. That had been another of the sayings. Mom was now off seeing the world. The last Rachel had heard from her was a postcard from Bali. She didn't want to be like that, to run off and leave family. Dad still wasn't over the divorce and had left for a condo in Florida and a girlfriend who was younger than either Chelsea or Rachel. She didn't even get postcards from him. But Chelsea was right. Rachel needed to shake off some of the caution that was clogging her life. Seth took over, got Chelsea pulled out to the SUV. Rachel stood in the doorway and waved until they were out of sight. Chelsea was getting her life back. That was great. And maybe Rachel had to start taking a few chances as well. Chapter 10. C. Hans had been dialing Rachel's number all afternoon with no answer. He'd left a message each time, but she hadn't returned his calls. Sean had had a small job for Chance this afternoon, which had pushed back his promise to swing by Rachel's place. The job, a check of an overly cautious but high-paying client's security system, was complete, and now Chance headed over to Rachel's. It was too late to cook, or it would be by the time he got there, so he stopped by his favorite steakhouse in Denver. They didn't normally do takeout, but Chance had struck up a friendship with the chef. He got steaks, fries, and garlic bread to go, added a bottle of Merlot to the bag, and headed for the suburbs. It was past 6 when he pulled his car into the driveway. The place looked fine, but it also looked dark, and Rachel's Volvo wasn't out front. Panic caught at him. Where could she be? What had happened? He pulled out his phone and was about to start calling numbers. Police first, then hospitals, when Rachel pulled her Volvo into the driveway. He headed over to help her with the boys. Grimacing, she got out of the car. She wore a short dress that showed off pale but shapely legs. Sorry. We didn't mean to be so late, but I got to talking with Julie over at Tots and Toes. She wants to buy a house she can fix up and flip, so I was giving her some advice, and the boys were having such fun. I think Tony has his first girlfriend, and... Whoa, slow down. He put a hand on her arm. You don't have to explain. I was just worried when you didn't pick up, and I haven't been waiting. Just got here. Had a last-minute job I had to cover. She pulled in a breath and her forehead tightened. She looked so worried he wanted to kiss that little line between her eyebrows. Instead, he grinned. Relax, the only danger was me losing my patience with a client. Guy calls us once a month because he's sure the system we installed isn't working because it hasn't caught anyone trying to break in. I swear half this job is hand-holding. Her face relaxed into a smile. What's the other half? PR. And I've already told Seth and Sean, no way am I ever doing that half. You hungry? Starved. He got David out of the car, Rachel got Tony. Heading back to his car, he grabbed the food. Rachel unlocked the door and they stepped inside. While Rachel fed the boys, he pulled out the steaks and put plates on the table. The smells had his stomach growling and he realized he'd skipped lunch. The boys didn't seem to want to settle, so Chance came over to Rachel. Why don't we all watch some TV? He'd come prepared with an animated movie that had plenty of cars and trucks. The boys would love the loud noises and flashy colors and probably wouldn't care about much else. They didn't. He got Rachel seated, a plate in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. He got the boys on the couch next to her, sat down with David between him and Rachel, slipped off his shoes and settled to watch the show. An hour later, the room had gotten quiet and dark. Chance glanced over and saw Rachel asleep. Her head tipped to one side and her fingers lax on her lap. And the boys, too, even though Tony was struggling to keep his eyes open. Turning on a light, Chance slipped the plate from Rachel's loose hand. Her dress had ridden up and he was seeing even more of those curvy legs of hers. She needed some sun on her skin, but that was about all she needed. If anything, even in sleep, she looked content, which was a far cry from when he'd first met her. He liked to think that maybe he helped there. He got the dishes in the washer and took the boys to their cribs. They could skip a bath tonight and thank everything they didn't need changing. David never woke, and Tony finally closed his eyes and let out a huge breath. Chance fiddled with the baby monitor, got it set up, and took the handheld with him. Heading back to Rachel, he wondered if he should let her sleep. However, she'd wake with a kink in her neck with her head flopped back on the sofa like that. Sitting down next to her, he called her name. She jerked awake, opening her eyes to stare at him. Her eyes looked huge, the green and the brown a soft shimmer. She put a hand to her head and then to Chance's face and murmured, "You're here. I was dreaming." He figured she was still half asleep, but when she trailed her fingers down his arm, he cupped her cheek. "Rachel, open your eyes. You need to get to bed." Bed," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Good idea. Us and bed." The deep tone in her voice left him instantly hard. Picking her up in his arms, he carried her down the hallway to her bedroom. He set her down on the bed and she stirred and caught his shirt. Stay. Hovering over her, he couldn't think of anything he wanted more. But did she know what she was doing? You sure? He asked. Her eyes opened to slits and she smiled at him. She pulled him down next to her and he went. She'd been haunting his dreams for the last several nights, but this was better. Having her in his arms, sleep-warmed and willing, was better than anything. Leaning over her, he kissed her cheek. She turned and he kissed that lush mouth of hers. She parted her lips for him this time. Let him in. Let him taste her. She tasted of wine and something else that heated his skin. She gave a soft moan. They made love, the both of them lost to their passions. After, Rachel's breathing eased and she fell asleep in his arms. Chapter 11. Bakel woke with Chance next to her, his breath on her neck and his body pressed tight against hers. For a moment, her heart skipped fast and she almost jumped out of bed, but he was a heavy, comfortable weight. She lay there, wondering what she was doing. Living, she told herself firmly, which she hadn't been doing for a long time. If she was being truthful, she'd stopped before she was pregnant, before she'd found out that Mark had been killed. In fact, every time he'd been sent overseas, she'd stopped living and spent each day holding her breath and waiting to hear from him, waiting to find out he was okay. Then, somewhere along the way, she'd gotten careless and had stopped holding her breath. And then came the knock at her door. The two uniforms looking at her with sympathy. After that, she'd started holding her breath again, but since Chance had worked his way into her life, she'd started breathing again. Last night, for the first time in a very long time, she'd relaxed. She'd done more than that. She'd let go. Everything she had been holding inside came out in a glorious expression of pleasure. But she needed to be realistic. This wasn't going to be a happily ever after. She'd given up on that. She wasn't looking for a knight in shining armor because knights got shot and came home in a coffin. This was a good for the moment. It was great for the moment, but a moment was all it could be. All she wanted it to be. In the dark bedroom, lying next to Chance, she could close her eyes, she could breathe in his scent, she could almost pretend the last year and a half hadn't happened. But she didn't want to pretend. Not now. She kept her eyes open. She wanted to know this was Chance, not some ghost from her past. He lay back, his body sprawled out and his long legs tangled in the sheets. He was still half wearing his shirt and it hung open, displaying a flat, muscular stomach with a noticeable scar. More than one, but she wasn't going to dwell on that. Reaching up with one hand, she touched him, and in this moment, she felt powerful giving back to him what he'd given her. This moment of bliss. After, he kissed her forehead, then her mouth. She knew he'd taste himself on her, and she found that sexy. The kiss deepened and she moaned. She missed the passion, the pleasure that came with spending time with a partner. She missed the peace that came after. But they'd had their moment. And now it was over, wasn't it? Rachel needed to put a stop to it, to this. She wasn't ready for another relationship, especially not with someone like Chance, and she had to make that clear. This doesn't mean anything. Except it did. He gave a low hum that could mean anything. She gave up on talking and curled up next to him. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. But it was nice to have a warm body to share her bed, and her muscles lax from sex. If she was lucky, the boys would sleep later than a little past dawn. If she was lucky, she wouldn't be falling for Chance, and they'd have fun and he'd move on and she'd get on with her life. If she was lucky. But when did that ever happen? Chapter 12. Chance woke to the sound of a shower running and a whimper threatening to head to a cry. He grabbed the baby monitor, pulled on his underwear and trousers, and headed into the boys' room. They were both up. David's face was puckered with a cry, and Tony was watching him as if he wanted to see how it went for David before he did the same. Full up diaper, big boy? Chance asked. He pulled David out and got him changed. By the time he was done, Tony was starting to cry and pound on his crib. Juggling the two of them, Chance got Tony changed, but then David was fussing again. Chance figured they needed to eat, and he was starting to see why Rachel was so worn out. He at least had them in high chairs at the table and almost interested in what he was doing in the kitchen when Rachel stepped in. Her hair was still wet, but she was smiling and in a fresh dress splashed with some kind of bright yellow flowers. She kissed Tony's head, then David's, and looked at Chance, her cheeks pink. Chance blew out a breath. Okay, no one said 2 kids aren't just double trouble, they're exponential. Ever consider selling one of them to the circus? Often, but how do I pick? You want a shower? I'll get the coffee going and these 2 fed. We're doing breastfeeding this morning. Chance's face scalded at that thought. Shower it is, he said, heading that way. And he was going to go for a cold one. How could he want her again when they'd... He shut down the thoughts, stripped and got the cold water running over his body. The boys were playing in the playpen when Chance got out. He smelled like Rachel now, at least like her shampoo. She gave him coffee. He drank it down, smiled, told her he'd see her later, and bolted. That was what she wanted, right? What he wanted. She'd said something last night about what they'd done hadn't meant anything. He didn't want it to mean anything either. Well, he wasn't going to think about that either. But he was hoping maybe Rachel would let him into her bed again, even if he was being a jerk this morning. He had a message from Sean. A new client was coming in and Sean wanted Chance around since Seth was off to Aspen with Chelsea. Chance couldn't stand this part of the job. While it was something Sean excelled at, he preferred to have someone else in the room with him when he met with clients to monitor for red flags and possibly key in on things he might have missed while discussing the contract and expectations. So he went to his place, changed, and headed to the office to be nice to the client. Maria was in. She'd switched her look recently to baby doll dresses that didn't hide her baby bump. Janet was also in, looking polished in a suit, but Janet always looked like the adult around here. The client was on time for once and came with an entourage. She was some kind of country music singer, was looking for a high-end getaway home in Denver area. It was pretty clear her manager was more interested in the security than she was. She gave Chance the eye. More than once. He wasn't interested. A deal got signed anyway to provide security for the star when she was in town, and the dog and pony show left. Chance yanked off his tie and sank into a chair. I see why you guys earn the big bucks. Janet grinned at him. What? Worn out by a little tour of the office? He shook his head. More like by 2 babies. Who knew kids were that much work? Coming over, Janet perched on the arm of his chair. When do I get to see them? Are they adorable? Head tipped to one side, Chance asked, Hey, would you be up for some babysitting? She grinned. You think you can convince Mama to leave her little ones with strangers? I can try. He texted Rachel's address to her number. Stop by at 5. You'll either be there for the evening or I'll end up cooking. Janet pulled out her phone, checked the address, and stood. In that case, I'm bringing Sean with me. Now, how about helping me and Maria with some old files? 2 hours later, Chance finally escaped the paperwork. He had a newfound respect for his brother's ability to get out of this aspect of the business, which was something both women commented on repeatedly. Granted, Janet worked for Trent in HR, so she had to be used to the monotony and the paper cuts. It was a relief to head to Rachel's place. She seemed shy around him, ducking her head, blushing, but he offered to take care of the boys for the afternoon, giving her some time on her own. She took him up on that, and he was going to take that as a good sign for her agreeing to allow Janet to look after the twins. Smiling, Rachel headed out with what looked like a laptop bag swung over her shoulder. Chance settled down with the boys. They were curious tykes, and it wouldn't be long before they were walking. Tony was the one who kept trying to stand, and David was the one who'd push him back on his butt. 2 hours later, he'd just about worn them out when Rachel came back. David rolled over to reach a toy, and Rachel gave a laugh. How did he learn to do that? He's brilliant, of course. She knelt down on the floor by the boys, kissed one and then the other. Chance almost put his face in her way for one of those. So, what have you been up to, or is it a secret? Getting up, she headed for the kitchen. Want some coffee? And, well, it's not much of a secret. I thought I'd show Julie some properties online. He got up and followed her, leaving the boys in their playpen. You're getting back into real estate? She shook her head. It's all changed so much. The prices, all the stuff is online now. I've been out of it for 3 years and it feels like 30. Chance leaned his palms on the kitchen counter. What is it you loved about it? She stopped, coffee pot in one hand and a filter in the other. What do you mean? I mean, look, I hated working at the FBI, but when I looked at it, what got me there in the first place was that I wanted to help people. That part of it I liked. Or take cooking. Chef Mike. She gave a laugh and turned back to the coffee. He fixed a firm stare on her. Chef Mike was a good guy. How'd you like the job of teaching your two about 8 years from now how to do anything in a kitchen? She grimaced. Okay, I get your point. Turning the coffee on, she leaned against the counter. So what did this genius do? He figured us out. One day, we were scientists making mad formulas. The next day, we were slashing at beef with knives like ninjas. Got so we couldn't wait to get into the kitchen. She shook her head. I'm missing the point here. Point is, he figured out what we liked and used that to pull us in. What did you like about real estate? Was it making the deal, negotiating? What got you to work every day? Head tipped to one side, she glanced down at the coffee maker. This is going to sound dumb, but, well, I liked staging a house. Getting it looking perfect. If that meant taking furniture out or putting something in or painting a wall. I loved making it look better. Making it just right. And well, it felt like matchmaking sometimes. Straightening, he spread his hands. Okay, so there's 2 options to explore. She looked up, her eyes warm. That look went straight to his gut and smacked him. All he could think of was how she'd looked last night, how she'd come apart under his hands. Her cheeks pinked, and he was willing to bet she was thinking of the same thing. He stepped closer. Come to dinner with me tonight. I don't want to cook for you. I want to buy you a meal, and for once I'm not willing to share you with those 2. He jerked a thumb toward the living room. The sound of the boys playing, blocks banging, and nonsense baby sounds said everything was good with those 2. Rachel looked down at her hands. I don't think I'm... Rachel, don't. He took another step closer and lifted a hand to her chin, forcing her gaze up to meet his. Don't shut me out, okay? Please. Rachel nodded. Okay. To dinner and a night out, too. Smiling, he dropped his hand. He glanced at his watch. Great. You have approximately 30 minutes to shower and change before Janet gets here. She's going to watch the boys for a few hours while you and I go have some adult time. Oh, and she's bringing Sean, so you'll get to meet him too. You'll like them. They're good people. Her eyes widened. Why are they coming to my house? Oh no, it's a mess, and how can I... They're complete strangers. He shook his head. No, you know me, I know them. Sean runs the best security company in Denver, and Janet's dying to meet your boys. If Seth was here, he'd vouch for them. And what? You're not going to trust your sister's boyfriend? She rubbed her forehead. That sounds so juvenile. Rachel, honey, you need to make the decision. You've now got 25 minutes. I'll tidy if you'll shower, but we're running out of time. For a second, he thought she'd bail. She stared at him, her mouth open but nothing coming out. She leaned toward him, gave him a kiss, and let out a breath. Okay, I can do this. Let's go have some fun. He smiled hearing her talk like that, a pep talk for herself. And then she was heading for her bedroom or the shower, and he was not going to think about joining her. Not with Sean and Janet on the way here. Chapter 13. Hen, Sean, and Janet arrived. Rachel had showered, changed, and prepped bottles for the boys in the fridge. Chance had tidied, but Rachel did another pass. The boys fussed, no doubt picking up on her nervous energy. She glanced at the 2 of them and then at Chance. I've never left them in the evening. He came over and took her hand. It's only a few hours. You were gone today for a couple of hours. They need to get used to you having a life too, especially if you're going back to work. Besides, Janet is amazing, and I think you'll really like her. Rachel pressed a hand to her stomach. She'd opted for jeans and a flowered blouse. She had lost most of her baby weight, but it seemed like her body had changed its shape. Most of her pre-pregnancy clothing was still a little too tight and she'd barely fit into her jeans. Tomorrow she'd get an exercise DVD or find a program on TV that she could follow. Maybe she'd get some weights. The doorbell rang and Rachel jumped. Heading to the door, she found a couple standing there. The woman stuck out her hand. "Hi, Janet Marshall. This is Sean. Has Chance been telling you we're the slave drivers? Where are your boys?" "Oh, they're adorable." Janet was inside the house and had swept up Tony before Rachel could move. Her husband came in after her. "Sorry for the whirlwind. Janet hears the word baby and loses it every time. Oh, looks like she's playing favorites." He came in and crouched down next to David, who wasn't looking sure about any of this. Thankfully, Chance took over. He showed the Marshalls where the baby's things were kept, going over the bottle warming directions. When did he learn all this? And then put a hand on the small of Rachel's back. She glanced at him. "Don't they need emergency?" She trailed off. "A security firm? Guess they don't need any of that." Chance smiled as Sean waved his phone at her. "Oh, I'd say it was covered, including a text file with everything I just went over with them. Let's go while the boys are still amused." She nodded and took a huge breath before walking determinedly toward the front door. Outside, the night had chilled. She heard David starting to cry and almost turned around. "Trust me. Let Janet handle it. They've been talking about having a baby, and this will be good practice for the both of them." She tensed. "So what? My boys are practice for them?" Or you could think of it as a test run for new babysitters. They both know CPR, and you really don't want to be on the receiving end when Janet is in mama bear mode. That woman is fiercely protective, and I'm fairly sure she's already in love with those little boys. Hands clenched into fists, and with Chance's hand on the small of her back, she headed for her car. He steered her toward his. The cry cut off, and Rachel glanced at the house. "Think they're okay? Maybe I should get in the car now?" "Good idea. I'm starving, and I bet you are too." Chance opened the door for her. Rachel let the air whoosh from her lungs in a giant rush. "I don't know if I can do this." Squatting down in the open door, Chance took her hands. "You can do this. They're only a phone call away. They're in great hands. Sean knows magic tricks. Now what sounds good for dinner? Chinese? Hey, I know a place over on Wincoop. Seafood done right. You wouldn't believe the crab legs, and they have scallops with a lemongrass that's amazing." Rachel held up her hands. "You pick? I have no idea, but it all sounds good." Standing, he waited until she secured her seatbelt and then shut her door before taking his place behind the wheel. He drove them to Wincoop, found a parking space, and walked with her to the restaurant. It was chilly enough that Rachel huddled close and tucked her arm into his. She'd brought a coat but had left it in the car. Inside, the place seemed filled with bright walls and hard spaces, and everyone looked so young. Or do I just feel old? She pushed the thought away. This was supposed to be a night out, a fun time, and she was not going to worry about the twins. But she asked, "Do you mind if I just call and check on Janet and Sean?" Chance handed her his cell phone. He got them a table, and by the time she'd been assured by Janet that everything was great, and had heard the boys' gurgling laughter in the background, Chance had drinks on the table. "Champagne," he said and lifted his glass. "To an evening out." She clinked her glass with his. She let him order, but Chance kept asking what she liked. She sipped, had the bubbles tickle her nose, and glanced at her watch. Chance sighed and reached across the table to take hold of her wrist. When she moved to pull away, he tightened his grip, removed her watch, and put it in his hip pocket. "Why did you do that?" "Because you can't seem to relax, and that watch is only a reminder of how long you've been away from the house." Rachel stared at him for a moment before dropping her gaze. He was right. She could do better than this, and she would. Picking up her glass, she asked, "So you worked for the FBI?" Chance smiled at her. "Anything so you don't talk about babies? I can work with that. And it was only a few years. I wasn't interested in the military like my brother and Sean, but I did want to help people." "So what happened? Why did you leave?" She sipped at her champagne. "One too many cases going wrong and the endless bureaucracy. It wore me down, so I left. Now I do freelance, mostly for Seth, but but I've also consulted with a couple other firms. What is it that your brother does exactly? Sean and Seth run a company called MJI, Marshall Jacobson Investigations, private security services here and abroad. It's standard stuff. Bodyguards, threat assessment, surveillance. When they both came out of the military, they wanted to keep doing what they were doing, and shifting into the private sector was more lucrative and safer. They were in the military like Mark. He nodded. Want to talk about him? Startled, she glanced at him. He smiled back. I know what it's like to lose someone. My parents died a long time ago. Car accident. Left Seth angry. And me. Well, I was pretty lost for a time. Seth hates to talk about him. Me, I like to remember. I don't know, it makes it seem like they're here. And, well, I'm just noisy, I guess. I'd like to know what type of relationship you had with him. And I guess I'm looking to duck any minefields. The salads came. Rachel picked up her fork, but her stomach felt hollow. He was my world. He's gone. I'm alone. End of story. 2 boys with you doesn't mean alone now, does it? Where'd you meet? High school. She smiled and speared a tomato. We were buddies first, a couple of nerds. We got paired up in science class and, well, things just slowly changed into more than friends. Chance was quiet for several seconds before he asked, What? You just woke up one day and realized you loved your best friend? Putting down her fork, she took up her glass. This conversation needed a drink. Or 2 or 3. I don't know that it happened that fast. We always hung out together. We went to prom, shared our first kiss, but, well, it didn't take off until later. Mark joined up, I was working, and I think I didn't want to let him go. Mark was a foster kid, and my parents got divorced, and I suddenly, well, it seemed like all I had was Mark and Chelsea. The waiter came and took the salads. The dinners came out, smelling good enough that Rachel's stomach growled. She dug into the scallops. These are great. Chance nodded. Wait until dessert. How'd you do at being a military wife? Rachel kept eating. I just wanted Mark to be happy. And it wasn't so bad with Mark stationed in Colorado Springs. I just wish... He looked up from his food and put a hand over hers. What? He was overseas when I learned I was pregnant. He never got to see the boys. They said it was an explosion. 6 other men died, and I always wonder who they left behind. Wives, mothers, brothers, sons, daughters. Chance pulled his hand back. Oh, Rachel, I'm so sorry. Didn't mean to dig. No, you're right. Talking about it, it is better. It takes some of the sting away. Chelsea, well, she hated bringing it up, so I just got used to never telling anyone. And she worries. I had the boys a little too early. I made it through the funeral and went into early labor a week later. The boys had to be flown to Denver Children's Hospital. Chelsea moved me up here to be with her, and we stayed. She forced a smile. Chance was staring at her, his focus intent. You've had it rough, haven't you? Rachel shrugged. Others have it worse. Look at everything that happened with that baby Chelsea helped save. I can't imagine how I'd handle someone walking off with my boys. Do you miss him? He asked. She tipped her head and he said, Mark, do you miss him? I mean, not just miss him for the boys' sake as a father, but as, well, you know. She glanced down at her scallops. Sometimes. Maybe not as much as I feel I should. She looked up. I can't believe I just said that. But it's true. Sometimes I think Mark and I just happen to need each other. It wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime passion. It was comfortable. I just knew all along that I'd marry him. It was like, well, I just knew it. I always had. We could complete each other's sentences, but he never made me feel like... Rachel stopped and stared at Chance. Like you do. There, it was out. Her face flamed hot, but she couldn't look away from Chance. The noise of the restaurant faded, leaving her too aware of Chance, of his stare on her, of how his mouth curved up even when he wasn't smiling, of how much he'd already come to mean to her. Chapter 14. Hans kept his gaze on Rachel. This was moving way too fast, but he had no idea how to slow it down. He didn't even know if he wanted to cool things off. In so many ways, it sounded like Rachel and Mark had been perfect for each other, and he and Rachel weren't. But they couldn't hide this spark between them. They couldn't ignore it. He also didn't want to compete with the dead man. Rachel looked away. When she looked up, the guilt in her eyes shot a pang through Chance's heart. "I shouldn't feel like that, should I?" she whispered. He frowned. "I don't think you should feel guilty, no matter how you feel now or in the future. Would Mark have wanted you to keep yourself locked away for the rest of your life?" Rachel shrugged. She poked at her half-eaten meal. "I don't know. If the roles had been reversed and you had died, would you have wanted him to remain single for the rest of his life?" Rachel shook her head. "Of course not. But it would be different for him. You want Chelsea to get on with her life? You need to get on with yours. The babies are my life. Right now. Sure. But you're still you, and you deserve to be happy." "I am happy." Chance tilted his head as he looked at her. She'd said it with such forcefulness, but did she really believe it? "Are you, though?" He held up his hand to get her to wait. "You love your children. Anyone can see that. But after everything we've talked about tonight, I have to ask, when was the last time you were truly happy? It seems like you've spent most of your adult life doing things for others. What are you doing for yourself?" She paused, fiddling with her fork, and opened and closed her mouth a couple times. Reaching out, he placed his hand on top of hers. When she lifted her head to look at him, she seemed so lost. He wanted to wipe that look from her face, but he had no idea how. "You don't have to answer me now. In fact, you don't ever have to answer either of those questions if you don't want to. But there's something to think about. You need to do what makes you happy, Rachel. Now. I don't know about you, but chocolate makes me happy. You ready for dessert? Their chocolate lava cake is every bit as sinful as it sounds." When she didn't respond immediately, he gave her a guarded look. "Uh-oh, we haven't had this discussion. Please say you like chocolate. Please?" She smiled. "I might be ready for some sinful, but..." She waved at her half-eaten dinner. "Can I get this to go too?" "Of course." He lifted his hand to get the server's attention and quickly placed their order. They'd decided to have decaf coffee and split one of the restaurant's decadent chocolate delights, even though Chance was fairly sure he could eat 3 on his own. When the server brought the molten lava cake to the table and added the handmade cream and fresh raspberries, he was certain he caught Rachel drooling. At least he hoped so. This, he could do. Picking up his spoon, he broke into the cake and dark chocolate deliciousness came pouring out. Scooping up a bite, he made sure to add some of the cream and a raspberry. Then he turned the spoon to offer Rachel the first bite. She seemed hesitant, but when she tasted the spoonful, her eyes lit up. Smiling at her, he reminded her, "I did warn you that it was good." Nodding her head, she agreed. "You were right. If I wasn't so full, I'd fight you for every last bite." They spent the next half hour talking about everything and nothing as they shared the lava cake and drank their coffees. For Chance, it was probably one of the best dates he'd ever been on. That had more to do with the company than the restaurant. Eventually, the cake was almost gone. Rachel had reached for the last bite, and he was prepared to let her have it. Scooping it up, she added one of the remaining raspberries and turned the spoon toward him. Tilting her head, "Last bite?" Leaning forward, he took the spoon in his mouth. It was as good as the first, but it also felt bittersweet. Rachel grabbed the last raspberry and popped it in her mouth. "That was delicious, thank you." "My pleasure." Was he reading too much into it, or did something seem off? Chapter 15. Hans drove Rachel home, trying to keep the atmosphere as light as it was over dessert in the hopes of banishing her worries. She had grown quieter the closer they got to her house. He glanced over, found and captured her hand in his. "You doing okay over there?" Rachel put a hand over his and rubbed at her watch, which he'd given back to her. "Just anxious to get home. And now I sound like I'm tied to them." She huffed out a breath. "I had a good time and the food was delicious, but I've never been away from them twice in one day, and definitely not in the evening. I feel like I might have missed out on something. Hey, if they were mine, I'd be worried as well. What am I saying? I worry about them and they aren't even mine. But Janet? She's solid, and so is Sean. I'd trust them with my life. He heard the squeak of the car seat leather as she shifted. How old are you anyway? Chance looked at her and smiled. I'll tell if you will. I'm 27 and proud of making it to that age. Your turn. 29. Does it bother you to be hanging out with an older man? Rachel gave a snort. I've been thinking a lot about what you said earlier. About finding what I used to like. About being happy. I'm going to work on that. He tightened his hold on her hand. What about what you like now? She pulled away from him. The car leather creaked again. He glanced at her and saw her staring out the car window. Was this her giving him the brush off? He realized he wasn't ready for that. Trying to put a smile in his voice, he told her, Hey, I'm not going anywhere for the next several days. I'll be by tomorrow to make you dinner. When Chelsea and Seth get back, we'll figure something else out. What about I don't want to take you away from your work. You were needed the other afternoon, and with Seth gone, hey, Sean knows where to find me. And you need my help. End of story. What do you think about taking the boys to the zoo tomorrow? Aren't they too young for that? You're never too young for the zoo. They'll get stuffed animals to take home. We'll eat junk food, and the fresh air will do us all some good. It's that or Janet and Maria will stick me with digitizing their old files again. I've already lost too many hours, I'll never get back doing that. Trust me when I say that's a fate worse than being eaten by a lion. She gave a laugh. Okay, if I'm getting you out of that horrible a fate, the zoo sounds fun. Good girl, he murmured. No way was he ready to be done with this. This whatever they had. He parked and Rachel headed for the front door before the engine stopped. Chance grabbed her to-go bag and headed in a little slower. He found Janet giving Rachel a full report on the evening, complete with photos and, from the sound of it, videos. Sean swapped a look with Chance. How'd it go? Chance asked, keeping his voice down. Nice kids. Can't wait to hire 'em, Sean said. And now, we're going home. He grabbed Janet's arm. Say goodnight, and let's go find our bed. With a wave, Janet let Sean drag her out as she told Rachel, happy to watch them again, just say the word. Thank you so much for everything, Rachel called out. She turned to Chance. Okay, you were right. It was great to get out of the house. I'm just going to go peek in on them. Rachel hurried down the hallway. Chance had planned to wait for her but found himself following her down the hall to the twins' bedroom. Janet had left their nightlight on and it cast a soft glow over the sleeping boys. Clad in onesies with superheroes on them, the boys slept through Rachel leaning down to kiss them both while retucking them in their beds. His own heart thumped against his chest when Tony made a soft noise before settling back down. He'd only known them for a couple weeks, but he was a goner around those two, and most definitely around their mother. He tiptoed out of the room and Rachel followed a few minutes later, her face eased into relief. They're sound asleep and looking like angels. Chance took hold of Rachel's hand. Great. Now how about we find our bed? Chapter 16. R. Ekel stared at him, her heart thudding. Bed? The word came out with a squeak. Together? She was being ridiculous, but she had realized over dinner tonight that she really was falling for him. And she just couldn't. He was a man who liked danger, who worked for a security company. She couldn't trust that he would always come home. More importantly, she didn't think she would survive another visit from uniformed officers. Once was enough to last 3 lifetimes. Her heart and her libido waged a silent war with each other, and she needed to put a stop to it before she blurted out something she might regret. Maybe I should go check on the boys again, Rachel said, half turning away. Chance held onto her hands. You just checked on them 2 minutes ago. Rachel tried not to meet his eyes. She was not going to trade safety for passion. She couldn't. He ducked his head low so that she had to look at him. Rachel, are you afraid of me? Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Finally, she shook her head. It's not you. Maybe it's me. I don't know. She knew she sounded thoroughly confused, and she tried to tug free to put some space between them, but he held on. Chance smiled. Let's try this then. If I were to kiss you, would that be bad? A kiss. She could manage that much. She shook her head, watching as he bent lower. His mouth covered hers. He stole her breath, her thoughts. Closing her eyes, she gave into the sensations stealing over her, the warmth flowing from him and into her. His lips were gentle at first, but she found herself needing more, wanting more of his touch. Stepping into him, she wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed herself against his chest. Not breaking the kiss, he walked backward, bringing her with him as he sat on the couch and tugged her down to straddle his thighs. She put her hands on his shoulders to steady herself. This wasn't a kiss. This was so much more. It felt like her world was tilting on its axis and she was about to go flying. She needed to stop this, but she didn't want to. Not now and maybe not ever. She'd deal with that thought another time. She currently had Chance under her fingers, and his strength might well be her undoing. Chance ran his hands up and down her back, as if urging her to relax against him. She leaned closer. You feel so good, he murmured, once again fastening his lips to hers in a soul-stealing kiss. He pulled back. Rachel, do you want me to stop? He softly whispered in her ear. She shook her head. I don't know, she mumbled. She pressed her lips against his neck, inhaling his scent. The answer was at least honest. She hadn't had enough time to figure out what she wanted or what she should want. Putting his hands on her hips, he pushed her upright until she was still sitting on his thighs. He held her there. She could see desire simmering in his eyes. He gave a soft groan. We can take this as slow as you want or need. The only thing I ask is that you're honest with me and yourself. This has nothing to do with your late husband and everything to do with you. I want you, more than I want my next breath. It's going to be nothing but good between us, but this has to be your decision. She touched his face and, I think you'd better go. The words cut into her. She hated to say them, but she had to. Pushing up from him, she stood. She didn't look at him as he walked out the door, but her legs gave out as soon as he shut the door behind him. She sank onto the couch, wondering if she'd made the wrong decision. She told herself she was going to be strong here. She had to be, not just for herself, but for the boys. So why did it hurt so much to send him away? Chapter 17. A.S. promised, Chance showed up in the afternoon for a trip to the zoo. Rachel had half expected him to call and cancel. But he'd come. He was smiling and he'd helped more than he knew. The boys hadn't really cared about the animals, but Tony had stared at the colors and wanted balloons, and David had seemed to want to put everything he could grab in his mouth. Chance had acted a perfect gentleman, helping her manage the babies and acting as if nothing had happened last night. And it hadn't, Rachel told herself. So why did she feel so guilty? Why did she want to keep touching him? Why did she look at other couples holding hands and have a pang of envy shoot through her? She couldn't have it both ways. But he was right, she needed help. She just wasn't sure she could handle him being around to be that helpful person. She'd gone to sleep with thoughts of Chance on her mind, and awakened to the same. She was going to have to do something, and do it soon. She waited until they got the boys home. Changed, fed, washed, and put to bed. It wasn't fair to Chance, but it was what it was. She walked into the kitchen to find him making something. Was that bread? Arms folded across her chest, she told him, "We need to talk." He glanced at her. The 4 words guys fear most. What did I do? He turned from the counter. He had flour on his hands and on his shirt, and how unfair was it that he looked amazing? She pulled in a breath and let the words out with the next breath. I can't do this thing with you. I can't risk it. You're a guy who carries a gun. You do dangerous things. I won't. I can't. Not again. He came over and took her hands, flour and dough now stuck to her fingers. She stared down at his hands. Rachel, look at me. Chin lifting, she looked up at him. Are you seriously going to make this about what I do for a living? Because if you are, I'll change that in a heartbeat. What? But I can't ask you. You can. I like what I do, but I'm not married to the work. I've walked away from a job before and I can do it again. But I don't think this is about that. She tried to pull away. He wouldn't let go. What do you mean? Of course it's about that. I'm not having the boys get attached to someone only to see that someone go away. You mean die? Let's at least be honest here. I get what happened with your late husband. I also talked to my brother and he talks to Chelsea, meaning he heard from her about your parents' divorce and how hard it was on you. Loss is never easy, but it's even harder when folks just fall off the radar the way your mom and dad did. Seems like a real slap in the face. She jerked away and grabbed a dish towel. You don't know anything. I know a lot. I was a kid when some drunk smashed into my parents' car. They were both gone. Just gone. I never saw them again. Didn't get to say goodbye. Didn't see their bodies, just saw these wooden boxes put in the ground. For 6 months, I kept thinking they were coming home. I dreamed they were with us. Took a lot longer before I realized the best I had were fading photographs and memories that were disappearing even faster. Rachel bit her lower lip. I'm sorry. Nothing to be sorry for. Not your fault. But it is your fault if you think you can put those boys into cotton wool and yourself along with them. What? You want a safe guy around? A mechanic, maybe? Not a cop. That's for sure. Or a firefighter. Oh, hey, how about a guy who owns a supermarket? That's safe, right? Well, newsflash. There is no safe. My mom did charity work, my dad was in finance, and they still died. Safe doesn't exist. You try to hang on to it, you'll end up driving your sister and your sons away, along with me. So if you're going to boot me, do it because you don't like me or don't want me. But don't do it thinking you're going to end up with anyone who will stay no matter what. Because bad stuff still happens. She backed up a step, her face flaming. He followed her, his own color high. I'm falling for you, Rachel. You're the wrong woman for me just because you do want safe. And I can't and won't promise it to you because that's not how life works. Now, if you can't handle that, I get it. But I will not stand by and watch you bury yourself and those 2 great little boys because of fear. You're better than that. I know you are. Trouble is, I'm not sure you know it. And I've said too much already. But you need to make the choices here. I can't make them for you. You leave me terrified, you'll make the wrong ones. But you are the one who gets to decide that, even if it leaves you alone. He turned, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand, getting flour and dough down his back. Rachel could feel the tears burning at the back of her eyes. She wanted to reach out and slap him for all he'd said. She wanted to run and hide. Worst of all, she didn't want to have heard those words. No safety. Those were the words that terrified her. She didn't watch the news, didn't want to think about her boys growing up and going off to school, and maybe going into the military, but they might. Trembling, she turned and ran for the bathroom. She locked the door behind her and sank down on the floor, hugging her knees, the tears falling fast and hot. She was losing everything. Everyone. Even when she didn't want that. She was pushing Chance away, just as she had pushed Chelsea out. Would she do that to the boys? Would she fail with them just so child services would take them away? What was she doing? She had no idea how long she sat here, shaking and crying and hurting. The tears dried at last. She'd run out of them. She dragged in a breath. Getting up, joints creaking, she stepped up to the mirror. She stared at herself a very long time. Chance was right. She wanted safety. Guarantees. And they were as much an illusion as the happily ever after she thought she'd had with Mark. But what did she do with that? She swiped at her face. She looked a wreck and felt one too, and she was tired of that. She got the shower running, got in and let it run, the stream hot and hard on her shoulders. She didn't know if Chance was still in the house, but she was going to assume the boys were okay. She just didn't know if she was. She came out of the shower, shut off the water, and headed into the living room. She didn't bother with a towel. She was playing for keeps now. She found Chance sitting in front of the TV, staring at it without really seeming to see it. Rachel stepped in front of the TV. Chance's eyes went wide. He sat very still. She put her hands on her hips. "You're right. I do want safe." He started to stand, but she put up a hand. "Trouble is, I feel safe with you. I like that. I like you more than I think I should. More than is smart. My mom ran away from our family. Couldn't take it and went to find herself, whatever that means. My dad fell apart after she left. Maybe I'll fall apart or run someday." She frowned. "The thing is, I don't think you will. But you're right about not knowing what will happen tomorrow. So, fine. Let's make the most of today. Of every day. And I want those days to be with you. That's my choice." He started to smile. His stare slid over her body, down and then back up, and his smile widened, the corners of his mouth tipping up. She walked toward him. She was dripping on the carpet and getting goosebumps. He stood and put a hand on her face. "Bread needs another 10 minutes, and you need to get dry. But can we pick this up then?" She nodded. He headed for the bathroom, came back with 2 towels, one for her hair along with one for her body. He dried her off, trailing kisses over every spot he could find. A buzzer sounded in the kitchen. He headed there and came back, taking her hands. "Did you at least have fun today? And yeah, I'm including the telling me off part here too." Rachel nodded. "I've had better. I hope..." He put a finger on her lips. "Let's make it better." He dropped the towel, yanked off his t-shirt, and put an arm around her, dragging her close. Rachel gasped at the first contact of her skin against his. Taking his hand, she pulled him toward the bedroom. Chance followed. When she pulled him to the side of the bed and reached for the buttons to his jeans, he grabbed her hands in his and held her firm. "We need to talk." The 4 words no woman wants to hear, not when she's looking for action. "I don't want to talk. We did that. Too much of that." He shook his head. "There aren't any guarantees, but I want a future with you. Meaning, much as I want to lay you down on this bed right now and have my way with you, I need to make sure you know I'm not looking for a one-night stand here." Rachel looked at him and sighed. "How about showing me that?" Reaching up, he took her face between his palms. He kissed her until her knees started to buckle and her toes seemed to be melting. He pulled back. "That help with the showing?" She gave a soft hum. He kissed her again. This time she ended it and pulled back. One thing, the boys? Are they... Do you..." Chance pulled her to sit on the bed next to him. "Rachel, I can't have kids of my own. I was sick when I was a kid. Kind of left me firing blanks." She stared at him. "Really? Yeah? Is that a deal breaker with you?" "I came to terms with it, but, well, if you want another kid, She gave a laugh. "Chance, I know this probably sounds rash, but I really don't see myself ever wanting to have any other children. The twins were hard, and frankly, they're more than enough for anyone. But if that's a deal breaker for you, we could adopt." Chance grinned. "Sweetheart, that's good to know. Now, what were you saying about action?" "I was saying shut up and kiss me again," she demanded. Chapter 18. See, Hans took advantage of their position on the bed and leaned Rachel back on the mattress. She looked wicked like that, naked in the fading sunlight. Leaning over her, he put his mouth on her. He crawled up her body, kissing every part on his way. Raising himself up on his elbows, he froze. "Crap!" Rachel's eyes flew open. "What is it?" "Condom. We already know I can't get you pregnant, and I'm clean, I swear. But if you want me to wear one, we'll have to put this on pause while I break a couple speed laws getting to the store and back." Reaching up, she cupped his face and leaned up to kiss him. "I've only ever been with Mark and you, so I'm clean too." Flopping back onto the bed, she gave him a royal wave. "So get back to it, Mr. Jacobson. My orgasm isn't going to come on its own." "Yes, ma'am." Chance chuckled and she gave him a mock glare. Rising up over her, he kissed her lips before shifting to kiss her neck. He knew he'd found the right spot when she started making small noises. He would kiss her all day if she would continue to make those sounds. After, Chance got his breath back, rolled onto his side and smiled. Now that is dangerous work. You okay? Rachel snuggled up against him. What's better than okay? I didn't know it could be like that. He trailed a finger down her arm. It's not always like that. Only when it's right. So you've never felt like I'd fallen apart and you put me back together? Never. Good. He heard smug pleasure and satisfaction in her voice. Can't promise it'll be like that always, he said. No, it'll get better, she muttered. She drifted to sleep in his arms. He woke once to fretful cries from the boys' room. Stumbling out of bed, he got the wet diapers off and warm bottles into the twins, and then curled up again with Rachel. This was nothing he had wanted, but somehow he'd ended up here. The question was, could he ever be good enough to truly be a part of this family? Chapter 19. A week later, Chance was trying to work out the next step, how to get Rachel to move in with him. They needed more room. Rachel helping Julie find a fixer-upper had turned into a referral, and Chance could see a business starting. She needed an office. He needed a decent oven and a bigger kitchen. The boys would eventually need their own rooms, and Chance was already scouting for referrals for great live-in maids who could double as a nanny or babysitter. That would be another tough sell, but one thing at a time. Seth, of course, called way earlier than he should have. Rachel was still in the shower, and Chance was struggling with a teething Tony, who didn't want to stop crying, while David was watching his brother and looked to be squashing up his face for a good ball. Chance juggled the phone and the baby, and Seth sounded disgustingly cheerful and rested as he said, Hey bro, Chelsea and I are flying back today, so we'll meet you at Trent and Brianna's. Chance winced as Tony let out another squall. Fine. He straightened. Wait, what's at Trent's? Barbecue? Didn't you get the memo? Nope, this is all news to me. Hey, is there something to numb a kid's gums? I don't want to give him any more sugar. Seth's laugh came over the phone line. That's a sentence I never thought to hear from you. Google it or stop by any drugstore and they'll set you up. Oh, and bring flowers for Brianna and a toy or something for baby Faith. I've got Trent covered with a bottle of that 30-year-old crap he likes. Chance hung up and swung Tony up in his arms. Instantly, he had David reaching for him, so he had to grab him too. Lugging the boys, he went in search of Rachel. Two things he'd learned over the last week were that Rachel couldn't resist when he kissed her behind her ear, and extra time was needed whenever it came to doing anything with the twins. He found her still wet and naked. He started to smile. She wagged a finger at him. Oh, no you don't. David's already starting up and Tony needs burping. I thought it was the teeth coming in. She wrapped a towel around herself, took Tony and put him over her shoulder. No, that face is his, I've got gas in my tummy from the bottle expression. Chance wiggled his eyebrows at Rachel. How about we get them both settled in front of the TV with a show and slip back into the shower? You're a man with ambition. Leaning over, she kissed him. A baby hand batted him on the face. Pulling back, Chance glanced at a smiling David. Either he wants in on the kissing or he's liking the TV plan. Oh, we're supposed to head over to Trent's today. You'll get to meet him, and the boys will meet up with a girl almost their own age. Rachel smiled and patted Tony's back. Maybe it'll be love at first sight for one of them. Yeah, let's just hope not both of them. You sure I can't talk you into slipping back into the shower? She smiled, a slow burn kind of smile. Maybe, after coffee and the boys settle. He slipped an arm around her waist. Think I could talk you into moving into a bigger place? She leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank heavens, I thought you'd never ask. The dishwasher is acting up again, I think the washing machine is shot, and I am so tired of that stained carpet in the living room. Think we could move next week? He stared at her. Man, I thought I'd have to ask you like a dozen times to get you to budge. She squeezed him tight. Tony burped and David let out a giggle. Chance, anywhere you go is where I want to be. Heart tightening, he kissed her forehead. Honey, one thing I can promise is to keep you close and keep you and the boys safe. Long as I'm here, I'll be doing that. She smiled up at him, her eyes shining. That sounds good. Now how about that breakfast? And are those cinnamon rolls I smell burning? With a curse, Chance rushed out of the bathroom, taking David with him. Rachel followed, bouncing Tony on her hip, and stood in the kitchen doorway as Chance turned off the oven and settled David in his high chair before pulling the cinnamon rolls out of the oven. Setting them on the counter, he inspected them. They don't appear burned. I must have dripped something on the bottom of the oven. Rachel kissed Tony and smiled. And that is why we don't want your soon-to-be daddy distracted. Because he burns things, but let's not tell him yet he's gonna be your daddy. I think he wants to think it's his idea. Chance froze, breakfast forgotten as he lifted his head to stare at her. What did you say? She shrugged her shoulders before settling Tony in his high chair. What? I've always liked being married, and from everything I've seen, I think you'll be really good at it. But if it helps, I can pretend that it's your idea and drag it out a little before I say yes. Chance whooped and reached for her. Dancing with her around the kitchen, he spun her around before bending her back in a dip. As he brought her up, he kissed her. I have to admit that I never thought I would fall head over heels for someone, much less have a family. You, Rachel Swanson, have given me everything I never dared dream about. I love you. I love all of you. And I love you, Chance Jacobson. Now, how about that breakfast? Smiling, he hugged her to him. He would have taken it further if the twins hadn't started to kick up a fuss at being ignored. Pressing a kiss to her forehead, he turned back to the stove. How about I finish this up, we get the boys settled, and you find us a bigger place to live? Agreed. Now hurry up, I'm starving. Yes, ma'am. Before he could finish plating the food, he felt Rachel's arms wrap around his waist from behind. Reaching back, he pulled her around to face him. Giving him a hug, she pressed a kiss to his chest. What was that for? Not that I'm complaining. She started to pull away and he stopped her. Rachel? Before she could answer him, her stomach gave off an angry growl. She clapped her arm over her stomach as they both laughed. I was going for sexy in the kitchen, but I'm thinking that will have to wait until I'm fed. Walking her over to the table. Well, if you like, I can always feed you by hand. Before she could reply, the twins began to pound on their high chairs, letting both the adults know that they were ready for whatever was next. Chuckling, he quickly cut up part of a cinnamon roll and placed the pieces in front of the boys while he and Rachel sat down to eat. There was extra sugar glaze, and he caught Rachel looking at it speculatively. Picking up a piece of the cinnamon roll, he dipped it in the glaze and presented it to her. He held his breath, waiting to see if she would take a bite. When she did, Rachel made a point to suck on the tip of his finger, and he groaned in response. Before he could take it any further, a piece of cinnamon roll hit the side of his face, followed by baby laughter. Shaking his head, he popped the piece in his mouth. Chance knew that joining a ready-made family would come with its ups and downs, and personally, he couldn't wait to experience every single one. Chapter 20. Later that afternoon, Rachel climbed out of her Volvo and looked up at the sprawling estate. Are you sure it's okay that we're here? The twins can get rambunctious in new surroundings. Chance unbuckled Tony and lifted him out of his car seat while she did the same for David. Are you kidding? This is probably the most baby-friendly get-together you will ever attend. In fact, you might pick up some additional babysitters out of the event. Walking around to the trunk with David on her hip, she reached for the diaper bag, but Chance beat her to it, so she grabbed the present for baby Faith and the flowers for Brianna. The pretty floral gift bag and ribbon gave it a festive look, and the bouquet matched the bag, which wasn't intentional. Do you think she'll like the present we got her? Faith? Pretty sure she won't remember, but Brianna will love it. Reaching for her, Chance squeezed the back of her neck before kissing her forehead. What are you afraid of? You've already met at least half the people who will be here, and they all love you. Rachel melted against him. What was she afraid of? Other than this would be the largest interaction she's had with adults since... When? Before she could answer, the door opened and both Janet and Chelsea flew out with their arms out. Hand over the twins, Janet called out as she scooped up Tony and lifted him into the air. His happy squeals were matched by David's as Chelsea took him from Rachel and gave him a hug and kiss. The guys are all outside staring at Trent's new grill, something about natural gas versus propane. Chelsea shrugged. So long as the food is cooked, I don't care. Rachel looked at Chance, whose eyes lit up. Shaking her head, she laughed. Go. He paused. Are you sure? We'll keep her entertained. Come on, Brianna is eager to meet you. Janet grabbed her hand while Chelsea took the diaper bag from Chance. The women dragged her into the house, not giving her a moment to look around as they settled in the living room where a young woman was finishing nursing a baby. There was a playpen on the floor already filled with toys. I hope you don't mind, but I thought the boys might get tired of being held, so I have a playpen set up here and another one outside. I'm Brianna, by the way, and you're Rachel? Rachel smiled at her and sat down on the couch beside her. I am, and thank you. That's incredibly thoughtful. This must be Faith? She is. Would you like to hold her? Holding her arms out, she accepted the precious bundle, who was sleepily looking her way. She's beautiful. I was so sorry to hear what had happened. Shaking her head, I can't imagine what you went through. Leaning toward her, Brianna kissed the top of Faith's head. It was horrible, but thanks to Chelsea and Seth, we got her back safe and sound. Your sister is amazing. Rachel had to agree. Chelsea had been there for her more times than she could count, and she'd grown to rely on knowing that she would always be there. What are you talking about? You, and how great you are, Rachel told her as she accepted the glass of wine her sister set in front of her, along with the flowers now in a vase with water. She watched as the twins were placed in the playpen and immediately began looking at the new toys. Reaching for the present she'd brought in, she held it up. Is there someplace I can put this, or I could open it now? Taking the gift from her, Brianna pulled the ribbon off. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get something more special. I only found out about this get-together a couple hours ago. You only needed to bring yourselves. Oh my gosh, these are adorable. Look at them. Brianna held up a tiny pair of pink moccasins lined with matching faux fur. Where did you find them? The woman who runs Tots and Toes, Julie, recommended a baby boutique at the mall. Brianna oohed and awed over the tiny shoes. Tots and Toes? What's that? Only a tiny bit of paradise for a mom. They have a short-term daycare and spa. So you can leave your baby in capable hands while you spend half a day getting some serious pampering. It's amazing. The twins love it there. That sounds fantastic. Let me know the next time you plan to go and maybe we can go together. Rachel smiled. I'd like that. The women sat together talking, and Rachel felt as though she'd known Brianna and Janet for years. Both women were so easygoing, and she loved seeing her sister so obviously at home around them. They had just finished toasting their new friendship when Chance walked into the living room holding up a bottle of wine. Anyone want a refill? 3 hands went up while Brianna declined since she was nursing. Scooping up the twins, the women headed out to the covered back patio where the guys were talking and laughing. Seth was stretched out on a lounge chair while Sean sat off to the side, and another guy who she assumed was Trent stood at the grill. Seeing Chance, Seth called out to him. Bro, finally. Please take over before Trent does something bad to our meal. Hey, I do know how to grill meat. Sure, if you like everything with a thick char on it. Chance, please help us all out. Laughing, Chance took over while Trent came toward her, holding his hand out. Trent Caldwell. You must be Rachel Swanson? Nodding her head, she shook his hand. And those must be Tony and David? How do you tell them apart? That's easy. Chance chimed in. Tony is the deep thinker and David is the troublemaker. The twins both turned their heads at the sound of his voice, and Rachel's heart gave a little thump at how much the boys already seemed to love him. Trent raised his eyebrows as he looked from Rachel to Chance and back again. Well, if you ask me, they're both heartbreakers. Janet spoke up. And don't be surprised if Faith is soon following along after them. The barbecue was lively, and everyone seemed to have a good time. Afterward, Rachel checked on the twins who had fallen asleep in the playpen. Grabbing a bottle of water, she joined Chance, who shifted to make room for her on the lounge chair he was sitting on. Any news on Bressie? Seth asked, and Rachel saw both Chelsea and Brianna stiffen. I'm going to assume you haven't checked your emails? Sean questioned. My what? Seth gave him a blank stare, leaving Rachel wondering what was going on. She felt Chance's breath on her neck as he leaned close to her. My brother has a firm dislike of computers and technology in general. How on earth did anyone get by without technology? Trent growled until Brianna placed her hand on his thigh. That seemed to calm him down. We have someone watching him. So far, he's still in Rome, but we anticipate that he'll be heading back to the US soon. It seems that both the SEC and the IRS have questions for him. Seth shook his head. Trent, man, when you get angry, you go all out. Trent shrugged as Brianna cuddled up against his side. It seemed like the safer route instead of bloodshed. Everyone seemed to nod their head in agreement. Who do you have on it? Jake Travers. There were more happy nods as Rachel looked around at the men. Chance whispered against her ear. Jake served with my brother and Sean. He's good at his job and will make sure Bressie doesn't try anything again. Rachel didn't know what to say to that. She could well imagine both Trent's and Brianna's anger and anguish over their baby's kidnapping. If it had been her, she wasn't sure she could have stopped at causing business problems for the kidnapper. Chance seemed to sense her unease, and he hugged her to his chest. She settled back against him, taking comfort in being in his arms. Then, as if on cue, the twins began to fuss, and Rachel reluctantly got up to check on them. Scooping David up, she took a sniff. Yep, time to go. After getting the twins changed and into dry clothes, they said their goodbyes and Rachel exchanged phone numbers with Brianna with the promise to set up a mommy day. Back in the car, Rachel looked over at Chance as he drove. Catching her glance, he asked, "Did you have a good time?" "I did." She didn't try to hide her yawn and he chuckled. She paused. Listening to the guys talk, I get why you want to help people like you do. I think that Mark must have felt the same way about his military service. Drawing in a long breath, she blew it out. If the twins were ever kidnapped, I would want someone like you and Seth and Sean on the case. Chance's hands tightened, then relaxed on the steering wheel. So what are you saying? I'm saying that you can't help being a hero, and I wouldn't want you to since that's one of the things I love about you. Chance reached over to take her hand and kiss the back. Is that the only thing you love about me? Laughing, she tried to tug her hand free, but he held on tight. Oh no, that's all you get. Can't have you getting a big head. He gave her a fake pout that made her laugh harder. Not even one more compliment? Well, she paused for dramatic effect. I do like that thing you do with your tongue. I'm hoping you'll do that later once the boys are down for the night. Chance squeezed her hand before setting it down on his thigh. I think that can be arranged. Sitting back, she faced forward. Good. Now concentrate on the road so we can get home safely. There are orgasms to be had. Yes, ma'am. Epilogue. 2 months later, Jake Travers sat outside Diamante Global New York offices, waiting for his target. He rested one elbow on a table. An espresso gave off steam and the bitter scent of coffee, and his cell phone waited for him on the table next to it. He had his Harley parked nearby, a ball cap pulled low, and a willingness to wait as long as needed. He was being paid good money to be here, and he didn't want to disappoint Sean or Trent. The ground-level floor of Diamante Global was a wide-open foyer that still managed to be highly secure. 4 guards, big guys who looked like former military, kept watch on the elevators and glass revolving doors. There was no arriving unannounced at Diamante. The lobby had a reception desk, a slab of expensive wood to go with the even more expensive marble, and a lot of people going in and out. From his vantage point, Jake had a great view. It was cold enough that the upturned collar of his wool peacoat didn't look out of place. He didn't have to wait long. A black limo pulled up in front of the office building. Jake picked up his phone as if he was texting and took photos of an older, heavy-set man in an expensive-looking camel hair coat getting out. The guy couldn't be anything but Italian with that olive skin and strong nose that would look at home on the bust of any Roman general. A flare of gray in the black hair at his temples and weathering on his face had Jake pegging him as in his 50s, with enough money for top-quality self-maintenance. A hat partially obscured the man's face, but Jake got one good photo as the guy turned to help a young woman out of the limo. Jake's interest rose. The girl was young enough to be the guy's daughter, but Jake had learned the hard way never to assume. She looked to be about 5'5" or 5'6" and in her mid-20s. Like the guy, she had on a heavy coat, meaning she wasn't used to New York. The locals, like him, hadn't geared up for true winter since there wasn't snow on the ground or in the gray clouds overhead yet. From what he could see, she had a good figure. Trim. She didn't have a hat on, so he could clearly see that she was smiling, staring around like a tourist. The vibrant energy she gave off reached him even from across the street. Blonde hair swung free and long. The driver got out and opened the trunk. He pulled out a large musical instrument of some kind in a black case. Guitar, maybe? Or something a little bigger. The woman ran her hand over the front of the case. God, that was sexy. Jake wasn't close enough to see her eyes or facial expression clearly, but just watching her stroke the instrument made him hard. It didn't help that he had a thing for blondes. Always had. Probably always would. Pushing his libido aside, he refocused. He watched his target interact with the young woman, wondering again about the relationship. Blonde hair didn't mean not Italian. Northern Italy produced its share of light-colored hair and skin. The older guy said something. The woman shook her head and picked up the instrument. The two of them headed into the building. Jake expected the limo to drive off, but the driver just sat behind the wheel, illegally parked and looking like he didn't care. Nice to be able to afford the ticket. Glancing at his watch, Jake noted the time as 11. He took a sip of his espresso and debated waiting or getting ahead of his target. A half hour later, his espresso was cold. The cafe was emptying and his target came out of the building. Jake rose, stretched, and headed to his bike. He watched the limo pull away from the curb and followed at a discreet distance. When the limo stopped in front of an Italian restaurant, Rizzole's, Jake parked the Harley, locked it, and headed inside. The establishment was busy, but Jake slipped the hostess 220s and got a table where he wanted, one over from his target. He also got his first up-close glimpse of the girl. Soft brown eyes, a strong, slightly Roman nose, high cheekbones, a lightly tanned complexion. Her eyes were framed by dark lashes, and her mouth was generous, wide with a pouty lower lip and full upper lip. A young, blonde Sophia Loren, Jake decided. She wore her hair straight and long, and without her coat on, he could see she was beautifully built. There were tempting curves on that slim frame. Turning his back before she noticed he was watching her, he sat down. The waitress who came to take his order flirted shamelessly. He smiled and let her. He ordered soup and coffee. He didn't drink on duty. Then he returned his focus to his target. The woman was talking, her voice low and throaty. He listened to her and caught a hint of an accent in her English. He wanted her to keep talking just to hear that huskiness in her tone. Meeting at Mount Sinai Children's later today. I was wondering if I could borrow your driver. We head to Colorado the day after. You must see the facilities there first. The girl huffed out a breath. Mr. Bresci, I simply want to assure myself I made the right decision. I do not want to be confined by what the medical community in this country says. The university environment, it will be much more suited to me. Very well. I just want to make good on my promise to your father. I have several meetings scheduled. You shall have the driver at your disposal the remainder of the day. Jake smiled. Bingo. He had their schedule, but they'd be splitting up. His orders were to follow Marco Bresci, but he really wished he could be tailing the girl instead. However, orders were orders, and Jake was being paid enough that he couldn't afford to ignore them. He was left wondering just what Marco Bresci has promised to this girl's dad. End of Book 3.